Please don't forget subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notified of new daily videos.
The skeletal latticework of the whispering Aetherium shrieked in protest, a chorus of tormented metal groaning against the relentless wind. High above the city's lower tiers, shrouded in a perpetual, swirling ether fog, Leiah Monnex moved with the silent grace of a phantom. Rust-eaten skybridges, once grand thoroughfares of a forgotten age, swayed precariously beneath her weight, each step a gamble against gravity and decay. Months of living on the knife's edge had honed her senses to an unnerving acuity. Every creak, every distant whir of an Authoriterian patrol craft, every subtle shift in the ether currents that pulsed through the derelict conduits around her was meticulously catalogued by her mind. She paused on a platform where shattered ether glass panels once offered a panoramic view of the smog-choked sprawl below. Now, only the milky opacity of the pervasive mist obscured the city, a comforting blanket that swallowed the Ministerium's omnipresent gaze. But comfort was a luxury Leiah couldn't afford. Her internal chronometer, a subtle neural implant she'd built herself, pulsed a low warning. Another sweep. "Damn it," she whispered, her breath condensing in the cold, damp air. She hadn't expected them this deep, this fast. Prime Authoriterians was escalating, always escalating. Her fingers, nimble and scarred from countless late-night repairs and desperate hacks, danced across a salvaged ether terminal. It was jury-rigged from discarded components, powered by a scavenged resonance generator that hummed a low, erratic melody. The screen flickered to life, displaying a rudimentary map of the immediate sector. Red dots, cold and unfeeling, bloomed on the interface, a cluster of Authoriterian cyber-automatons and human enforcers, moving with alarming coordination, sweeping through the labyrinthine pathways below the Aetherium. They were using a new pattern, a fractal-based algorithm designed to root out even the most seasoned urban ghosts. Leiah felt a flicker of grudging admiration for the cold efficiency, quickly stifling it with a surge of adrenaline. She opened an internal comm channel, a secure burst transmission frequency only she could access, and started typing a flurry of commands. Her plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal, but it was her only chance. The Aetherium, despite its decay, still held residual power conduits, remnants of its former glory as a vital nexus. She had spent weeks mapping them, not just for power, but for their potential as a digital weapon. The target was a primary ether relay node, currently active and feeding surveillance data directly to the Authoriterian command center. If she could overload it, just for a moment, create a localized feedback loop, it would blind and deafen them, buying her precious minutes. "Engaging sequence Echo 7, she murmured, her eyes fixed on the terminal. The code flowed from her, a cascade of intricate scripts designed to mimic a natural ether storm. She wasn't just hacking their system, she was teaching the city itself to scream. The air around her began to crackle, not just with static, but with a growing etheric charge. The massive, inert conduits that snaked through the Aetherium began to hum, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the metal under her feet. Sparks, blue and angry, leaped between loose connections. It was beautiful, terrifying, a dangerous game of digital chicken. Suddenly, a new cluster of red dots appeared, closer this time, just 2 levels below her. They were climbing the central access shaft, their heavy metallic footsteps echoing ominously through the ancient structure. Seeker-automatons. She recognized the unique signature of their optical sensors, their synchronized movements. Prime was using the new models. Faster, smarter, more relentless. "Too close, too fast," she hissed, slamming her palm onto a recalcitrant switch, forcing more power into the feedback loop. The screen flared, temporarily blinding her, then resolved into a chaotic maelstrom of data. The red dots on her map flickered, then vanished, replaced by a storm of static. A guttural roar erupted from below, a mechanical shriek of metal on metal as the automaton's systems overloaded. She heard the distinct thud of a heavy chassis hitting a derelict platform, then the crackle of a human voice, frantic and distorted, through the comms. "System failure! We're blind! Repeat, targets lost. Initiating manual sweep." Leiah didn't wait. The surge would only last a few minutes, maybe 5 if she was lucky. She scrambled away from the terminal, grabbing her pack, a worn, heavy satchel containing her most precious possession, the Aether-Engine Blueprint, tucked securely inside a hardened data shard. She moved with practiced haste, slipping into a narrow maintenance shaft, its rusty grate groaning faintly as she pushed through. The air in the shaft was thick with dust and the metallic tang of decay. She moved through the darkness, guided by muscle memory and the faint glow of bioluminescent moss on the crumbling walls. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic clockwork mechanism threatening to burst. This was her life now. Months of this. Always running, always hiding, always one step ahead. The weight of the blueprint, the knowledge it contained, was a constant, suffocating burden. She had stolen it to shatter the Ministerium's dominion, to spark liberation, but the deeper she delved, the more she questioned the cost of such freedom. Finally, she reached a precarious ledge overlooking a dizzying chasm. A collapsed sky bridge, her intended escape route, lay twisted and broken hundreds of meters below. She swore softly. Prime was learning her patterns. This wasn't just a random sweep, it was a concerted effort to box her in. With a sigh of resignation, she pulled out a specialized grappling hook, its magnetic clamp glowing faintly. She aimed it at a distant, corroded beam on the adjacent tower, a leap of faith across the swirling ether fog. The clamp hissed, grabbing hold. "Time to fly, ghost," she muttered, and swung out into the void, the wind tearing at her clothes, the roar of the city a muted growl beneath her. The taste of ozone was sharp on her tongue, a constant reminder of the volatile world she navigated. Safely across, perched precariously on a derelict balcony, Leiah allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. The adrenaline began to recede, replaced by a familiar weariness that settled deep in her bones. She glanced at her pack at the hidden data shard, the Aether-Engine Blueprint. Its very name was a whisper of immense power, a promise of chaos or liberation, depending on whose hands it rested in. And for now, it rested in hers. She found a relatively sheltered alcove within the decaying apartment block, its windows long shattered, offering a panoramic view of the lower mid-tiers of the city. The Aetherium's ghostly hum was now a distant memory, replaced by the rhythmic clang of distant industrial activity and the ever-present, low thrum of the Ministerium's vast network. Leiah pulled out her portable etho interface, a slim, elegant device disguised as a mundane data slate. With practiced movements, she inserted the hardened data shard containing the blueprint. The screen flickered, displaying the Ministerium's most guarded secret, the Aether-Engine Blueprint, a swirling, intricate holographic projection of crystalline conduits, resonance chambers, and power regulators. It was a marvel of theoretical engineering, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. She had spent months trying to crack its core code, to understand its functionality. What she had uncovered so far was merely the outermost layer, a complex shell designed to deter even the most brilliant minds. It was less a blueprint for a conventional weapon, and more a schematic for a fundamental shift in etheric energy manipulation, capable of either unprecedented generation or devastating disruption. The implications were staggering. As she delved deeper, the blueprint unfurled before her in dazzling holographic layers. The initial schematic depicted a central resonance core, humming with simulated energy, surrounded by an array of intricate stabilizers. But as she tried to access the deeper subroutines, she hit a wall. Cryptic security measures, unlike anything she'd ever encountered, shimmered into existence. They weren't just digital locks. They were embedded within the very theoretical physics of the design itself, almost organic in their complexity. She isolated a particularly stubborn set of equations, a series of interwoven ether flux regulators that seemed to defy conventional logic. Her own hacking signature, a series of complex algorithms she'd refined over years, simply dissolved against them, unable to find purchase. It was like trying to hack a wave with a wrench. "What in the name of Cogsworth?" she muttered, leaning closer to the holographic display, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had never been truly baffled by a system before. There was always a loophole, a backdoor, an overlooked variable. But this felt deliberate, almost like a philosophical statement embedded in the code. She spent hours, lost in the luminous labyrinth of the blueprint. Time seemed to warp, the weariness of the chase temporarily forgotten in the face of this intellectual challenge. She tried a quantum tunneling bypass, a speculative technique she'd only experimented with in theory, but the blueprint merely absorbed her attempt, rendering it inert. It was like the blueprint itself was alive, reacting to her every probe. Leiah ran her fingers through her disheveled hair, a frustrated groan escaping her lips. This wasn't just a data heist. It was a chess match against a ghost, a mind far more advanced than she could fathom, leaving her with a creation she couldn't fully comprehend or control. The weight of her initial idealism began to press down on her. What if she had stolen something too powerful, too volatile? What if her attempt at liberation would only unleash a chaos far worse than the Ministerium's oppressive order? The thought was a cold knot in her gut. She needed help, a deeper understanding of its paradoxical design. A low, insistent buzz from her wristcom broke her concentration. It was a coded signal, urgent and specific. Alistair. "Took you long enough, Ghost," Alistair Croft's voice crackled through the comm, laced with his usual dry pragmatism. "Authoriterians are still crawling all over the upper sprawl. Your little fireworks display lit up half the grid. They're calling in specialized drones. You need to move now." "I know," Leiah replied, her voice tight with exhaustion. She quickly packed her interface, securing the data shard once more. "Where to?" "Shifting Pathways Hub, my old stomping grounds. Less aerial surveillance there. I'll meet you at the old pneumatic intake on 3rd Street near the Rustgear Foundry perimeter. Midnight. Don't be late or don't come at all." His tone was blunt, but she detected the underlying concern, a rare commodity in their line of work. "Understood, and Alistair, thanks." A beat of silence. "Just be there, Leiah." The journey from the derelict high-rise to the Shifting Pathways Hub was a dangerous ballet of shadows and quick footwork. Leiah traversed the grimy rooftops, leaped across narrow chasms between buildings, and navigated the perpetually steam-hissing alleyways of the lower mid-tiers. The city, usually a symphony of regulated activity, now felt like a predatory beast, its mechanical eyes searching, its metallic breath hot on her heels. Alistair was waiting for her, a dark silhouette against the flickering gaslight of a deserted street corner. He was a man built for the shadows, his movements fluid and silent. His heavy trench coat, scarred and stained, seemed to absorb the meager light. He didn't offer a greeting, merely a curt nod. "They're throwing everything they have at you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Prime Authoriterians has pulled every available unit from the northern sectors. Even the regular patrols are getting augmented with new optics. They're looking for etheric signatures, your specific frequency. Your little trick at the Aetherium probably just made you even more of a priority target." Leiah grimaced. "I figured as much. The automatons they sent were the new seekers, faster than I anticipated." Alistair grunted. "They're not just automatons anymore. Ministerium Cogsworth has approved Prime's requests for a new generation of hybrid enforcers. Part machine, part something else. They're getting desperate, or perhaps just more efficient." He led her into a recessed alley, pushing aside a heavy tarp to reveal a hidden entrance. "This way. The pneumatic intake hasn't been used in decades, but it still connects to some of the old maintenance lines. The Authoriterians haven't bothered to map them all yet." The passage was narrow, dark, and smelled of stale oil and damp earth. Leiah followed Alistair, his figure moving confidently through the gloom. He was her lifeline, her connection to the city's underbelly, a pragmatic survivor who provided critical services for a price, but with an unspoken understanding of the struggle against the Ministerium. She trusted him, as much as she could trust anyone in her precarious existence. They emerged into a vast, subterranean cavern, the former nerve center of the city's pneumatic delivery system. Towering, brass-bound pipes snaked across the ceiling like petrified serpents, leading off into myriad directions. The air was thick with the faint, ever-present hum of subtly rerouted ether currents, powering illicit tech. Makeshift shelters, crafted from salvaged gears and canvas, dotted the cavern floor. This was the Shifting Pathways Hub, a sanctuary for those who lived outside the Ministerium's oppressive gaze. Alistair led her to a small, enclosed room, once a control booth for the pneumatic tubes, now repurposed as a secure workspace. A single, low-powered ether lamp cast a warm, yellow glow over a cluttered workbench. "Here," Alastair said, tossing a small, leather-bound pouch onto the table. "New papers. Identity profile. Lyra Thorne, a mid-tier clockwork repair apprentice, recently transferred to the Cogbloom Conservatories. It's thin, but it'll get you past the initial scans. Remember, you're meticulous, a bit shy, always tinkering." Leiah examined the forged documents. An ID chip, a work permit, a ration card. The craftsmanship was impeccable. "Conservatories, huh? That's a bold choice. Heavy surveillance there." "Precisely why they won't look for you there," Alastair countered. "Everyone knows what a surveillance nightmare the conservatories are. Besides, it's a temporary solution, just enough to buy you some breathing room. Prime is looking for a ghost. You need to become something else for a while, a cog in the machine, as they say." He fixed her with a wary gaze. "What did you find this time, Leiah? What makes them this agitated?" Leiah hesitated, her hand unconsciously brushing against her pack. She couldn't tell him everything, not yet. Not about the true nature of the blueprint, the immense power it held. It was too dangerous, too destabilizing. "Just the usual, more layers of encryption than I anticipated. A very stubborn design." Alastair's eyes narrowed slightly, betraying a flicker of suspicion, but he didn't push. He respected boundaries, especially when secrets were involved. "Well, whatever it is, it's got Prime's circuits overheating. I've heard whispers from my network. He's personally overseeing the deployment of these new seekers. They're not just tracking ether signatures, they can analyze residual data traces, environmental resonance. They're designed to hunt you specifically." He tapped a finger on a schematic projected from his wrist-mounted device, a diagram of the new automaton models. "They're called chasers. Enhanced optical sensors, adaptive locomotion for varied terrain, and a unique ether resonance scanner. They can trace the specific output signature of individual ether devices, even those with heavy masking. Your portable interface, your neural implants, they have a unique energy profile. They're calibrating for it." A cold dread seeped into Leiah's bones. This was worse than she thought. It meant her very presence, her very thoughts transmitted via her implants, left a digital footprint. Prime was turning the city itself into a weapon against her. "How accurate are they?" "Too accurate," Alastair said simply. "They haven't found you yet, but they're getting closer. This sanctuary won't last forever. Even I have limits. You need to keep moving, keep changing, keep them guessing." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "Or you need to neutralize what they're chasing." Leiah nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. Neutralize the blueprint, or neutralize the threat from Prime. The former felt like admitting defeat, a betrayal of everything she fought for. The latter seemed impossible against the full might of the Ministerium. Meanwhile, high above, in the sterile, gleaming halls of the Ministerium, Prime Authoriterians stood ramrod straight before Ministerium Cogsworth. The Supreme Regulator's chambers were a testament to her absolute authority, walls of polished obsidian and brass, a ceiling of intricate clockwork gears that hummed with a barely perceptible, omniscient power. Ministerium Cogsworth herself was a figure of cold, almost ethereal, presence. Her face, though human in appearance, bore an ageless quality, her eyes like chips of obsidian, utterly devoid of warmth or wavering emotion. "Prime," her voice, a smooth, synthesized resonance, filled the cavernous chamber. "Report on the Monnex operation. I require a concise update on why this rogue element continues to elude our grasp." Prime didn't flinch. His own biomechanical augmentations hummed faintly beneath his uniform, a quiet testament to his unwavering dedication. "Ministerium, the parameters of the fugitive's evasion tactics have evolved. Her capacity for improvisation within our network infrastructure is significant. However, our counter-strategies have been refined. The deployment of the new chaser automatons, integrated with advanced ether resonance tracking algorithms, is yielding unprecedented results." He activated a holographic display, projecting a detailed, real-time map of the city. Swarms of tiny, glowing blue dots represented Authoritarian units, methodically sifting through the lower districts. A single, flickering red dot, constantly shifting and fading, represented Leiah Monnex's last known and projected positions. Our analysis indicates she employs a unique energy signature derived from custom-built neural implants and etho-interface devices. Prime continued, his voice devoid of emotion, a pure conduit of data. The chasers are calibrated to isolate this specific frequency. We have correlated her recent digital trap in the Whispering Aetherium, a feedback loop that momentarily blinded our aerial surveillance with a specific energy surge pattern. The chasers can now read these residual etheric imprints, allowing us to project her movements with greater accuracy. He zoomed in on a section of the map, highlighting the shifting pathways hub. Her network of support, the so-called ghost runners, has provided temporary sanctuaries. We anticipate her next move will be into a more secure, subterranean location, likely within one of these established blind spots. Our current sweep is designed to compress these pathways, forcing her into a predetermined engagement zone. Ministerium Cogsworth's eyes, unblinking, remained fixed on the holographic map. Compress, engage, retrieve the blueprint. Her defiance is an anomaly. Anomalies are inefficient. This asset must be reclaimed. Its capabilities under unauthorized control represent a fundamental challenge to the stability of the Cogwheel Crown. Understood, Ministerium, Prime affirmed. The chasers are already mapping the subterranean conduits. We are adapting our strategy from wide-net sweeping to targeted extraction. It is a matter of hours before her current sanctuary is compromised. She cannot run forever. The city is a closed system, and we control all variables. His voice held an undertone of absolute certainty, a conviction forged in the Ministerium's rigid ideology. He saw Leiah Monnex not as a person, but as a dangerous equation to be solved, a flaw in the perfect logic of their dominion. His only conflict was the gnawing frustration that this single, unpredictable human element continued to defy the immutable laws of order he had been designed to enforce. He would eradicate that flaw. Back in the shifting pathways hub, Leiah had found a quiet corner, away from the hushed activities of Alistair's network. The new credentials, the warning about the chasers, it all underscored the urgency of her situation. She couldn't afford to waste a single moment. She reactivated her etho-interface, the holographic projection of the Aether-Engine Blueprint blooming once more before her. The intricate designs, which had once felt merely complex, now seemed almost mocking in their elegance. She needed to bypass those paradoxical ethoflux regulators to understand the core functionality of the device. Pushing past her exhaustion, she began a new approach, not brute force, but a delicate, almost intuitive dance through the code. She remembered the hidden, subtle currents she had once found in the Grand Chronarium, the echoes of forgotten data streams that hinted at a deeper, more organic architecture within the Ministerium's rigid systems. Perhaps the blueprint held a similar secret. She spent hours, her fingers flying across the interface, probing, analyzing, drawing connections between seemingly disparate elements. The rhythmic hum of the repurposed pneumatic tubes faded into the background, replaced by the silent symphony of pure data. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to discern a faint, shimmering sublayer beneath the visible schematics. It wasn't an encryption layer. It was a ghost signature, a watermark of the original design philosophy, subtly interwoven into the core logic. With a surge of excitement, she isolated a sequence of ether frequency modulators that she had initially dismissed as redundant. They pulsed with an irregular rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, distinct from the rigid mathematical perfection of the surrounding design. She initiated a deep scan, bypassing the blueprint's visible security protocols and targeting this anomalous signature. The holographic projection rippled, shifting its intricate patterns. The central resonance core, previously static, began to pulse with a faint crimson light. Then, text, deliberately obscured and fragmented, began to unfurl within the inner workings of the blueprint, visible only through a specific etheric lens she had just applied. Her eyes widened, reading the words, her breath catching in her throat. Original intent, safeguard, not unleash, but where unforeseen resonance cascades, the architecture's folly, a failsafe woven for the inevitable corruption. And then, a sequence of alphanumeric characters, a name almost but not quite decipherable, FNCH. BRTH Lomu. Leiah stared at the ghostly inscription, a chill spreading through her. Unforeseen resonance cascades. A failsafe. Not a weapon of liberation, but something designed to prevent something worse. This wasn't just a powerful engine. It was a ticking time bomb with a hidden kill switch. And its original designer, someone named Finch, had known it and built a warning into its very heart. The implications crashed over her. She had risked everything for this blueprint, believing it to be the key to freedom. But if it was designed with a failsafe, a control mechanism for its misuse, then it was even more dangerous than she could have imagined. Who was this Finch? And what had he seen, what had he feared, to embed such a cryptic, ominous warning into the very heart of his creation? The hum of the shifting pathways hub, the distant clangs of the city, all faded into a dull roar. Her entire perception of the blueprint, of the Ministerium, of her own mission, had just shattered. She was no longer just a ghost in the gears, a hacker on the run. She was now holding a paradox, a weapon designed with its own self-destruction, and the only one who truly understood it might still be out there. She had to find him. The acrid tang of recycled oil and stale steam clung to Leiah Monnex, a perpetual ghost in the temporary machine of Alistair Croft's shifting pathways hub. The repurposed pneumatic tube control room, a labyrinth of decaying brass conduits and silent conveyor belts, was a far cry from the echoing expanse of the whispering Aetherium, but it offered anonymity, albeit a precarious one. Outside, the city pulsed with an intensified dread. The Authoriterians, spurred by Prime's renewed directive, were tightening their mechanical grip, their cyber-automatons humming like vengeful hornets through the city's lower tiers, their ether sniffers tuned for any whisper of her presence. Leiah had felt the shift, a subtle tremor in the network, before Alistair confirmed it. Her digital traps, once a novelty, were now a necessity, each hastily laid snare a desperate plea for a few more precious hours. Her current sanctuary was more exposed, a testament to the escalating hunt. But here, within the nerve center of Alistair's subterranean network, she had the data feeds she needed, a constantly updating mosaic of sensor readings, broken reports, and the chilling silence of newly designated red zones. She sat hunched over a jury-rigged console, its ether glass flickering with the vibrant, maddening geometry of the Aether-Engine Blueprint. Months she had spent deciphering it, peeling back layer after encrypted layer, only to find herself staring at an insoluble paradox. The blueprint wasn't merely complex, it was antagonistic. She traced a particularly intricate series of ether resonance regulators, their schematics suggesting a design intended for both immense power generation and simultaneous, subtle disruption. It was like a clockwork heart designed to beat in two conflicting rhythms at once. Her fingers, stained with printer's ink and the faint sheen of ethagel, hovered over a particularly enigmatic section. A sequence of conduits, labeled harmonic dampeners, should, by all laws of ether mechanics, stabilize the output. Yet, embedded within their very structure were inverse frequency emitters, designed to introduce controlled dissonance. It was counterintuitive, bordering on insane. "No, no, no," she murmured, her voice a rough whisper against the hum of the console. A lock of dark hair, streaked with oil, fell across her face as she leaned closer. "This makes no sense. Why build in a self-destructive feedback loop disguised as a failsafe? Or is it a failsafe disguised as a self-destructive loop?" Her own understanding, forged in the fires of forbidden networks and Ministerium-grade encryption, was immense. She could dismantle and rebuild an ether network blindfolded, hack the very cog logic of a surveillance drone with a thought. But this blueprint defied logical engineering. It had elements of genius, undeniable and terrifying, but married to a subtle, almost philosophical sabotage. It hinted at a mind that understood ether physics not just as a science, but as an art, capable of weaving conflicting intentions into a singular, cohesive design. She punched up a cross-reference sequence, trying to match the paradoxical components to any known Ministerium-grade tech. Nothing. The closest analogies were archaic, proto-etheric concepts, long abandoned due to their inherent instability or their sheer, bewildering complexity. This blueprint was decades, possibly a century, ahead of anything currently in active use, yet it seemed to draw from forgotten principles. Frustration coiled in her gut. She risked everything for this. Every shadow she'd hidden in, every stolen ration, every sleepless night had been for this. To liberate the city, to shatter the Ministerium's iron dominion. But how could she wield a weapon she didn't fully comprehend, one that seemed to resist its own purpose? The cryptic warning she'd found embedded in the initial schematics, unforeseen resonance cascades, echoed in her mind. It wasn't just a technical caution. It felt like a moral burden, a ghost whisper from the designer themselves. A distant clang from the pneumatic tube network, a rhythmic thrum that wasn't part of the hub's usual symphony of murmurs and clicks, brought Leiah sharply back to the present. Her hand flew to the emergency disconnect, her eyes darting to the tactical displays Alistair had set up. The network map showed an anomaly, a small, dark red flicker on the edge of the industrial mid-tiers, far too close to one of Alistair's known safe points. "Alistair," she hissed into her comlink, "anomaly on quadrant Delta 7. Is that you?" Alistair's voice, usually a calm monotone, had a strained edge. "Negative, Leiah. That's a seeker-automaton patrol. Far closer to the main thoroughfare than usual. They're pushing hard. Your ghost signal on the perimeter is fatting fast. How's the blueprint?" Leiah glanced back at the glowing schematics, a knot tightening in her stomach. "It's difficult. It's almost deliberately obtuse. I need a fresh pair of eyes. Someone with a deep understanding of unorthodox Aether-tech, pre-Ministerium refinement. Someone who knows what it means to build a machine with a soul or a conscience." Silence stretched for a moment, punctuated by the faint hum of the seeker-automaton gaining ground. "You mean Cogsley," Alistair stated, not a question. Leiah hesitated. This Cogsley. The name was whispered in the city's underbelly with a mixture of awe and trepidation. A legend of the brass weave, the black market artificer who could conjure Aether-tech from raw scrap and forgotten principles. He was utterly amoral, notoriously expensive, and fiercely independent. Trusting him with even a redacted piece of the blueprint felt like handing a live grenade to a professional juggler. But Alistair was right. Cogsley was perhaps the only one. "Yes," Leiah finally conceded, her voice tight with reluctant desperation. "Cogsley, can you arrange it, discreetly and quickly?" "That's his only setting," Alistair replied, a dry note in his tone. "But it will come with a price, and the brass weave is crawling. Prime Authoriterians has his bots out in force. It's a risk." "I know," Leiah said, already shutting down the console, the complex blueprint fatting from existence. "But it's a risk I have to take. I can't deploy this without understanding every gear, every current, not with what's embedded in it." She grabbed her modified Aether pistol, checking the charge. The clock was ticking, and the gears were grinding to a halt. Sela's thorn ran a gloved finger along the spine of a gilded data orb, its surface cool and smooth beneath the reinforced fabric. The Veridian archives hummed around him, a cathedral of curated information, its vast halls designed to project an image of transparent truth. But Sela's knew the truth was a brittle thing, easily shattered, often melted down and recast into Ministerium-approved narratives. His station, deep within the restricted archival vaults, was one of quiet diligence. Today's task: sanitizing public records related to the Grand Chronarium breach. This meant meticulously reviewing and editing any data streams, historical references, or archived news fragments that might shed an inconvenient light on Leiah Monnex's audacity, or, worse, reveal vulnerabilities in the Ministerium's absolute control. It was a monotonous, soul-crushing job, but one Sela's had turned into his own quiet rebellion. Every deletion, every redaction left a ghost in the system, a subtle trace he could later follow. His Aether console, a high-fidelity Ministerium model, displayed a cascade of archival data. Public reports of increased security, official condemnations of the ghosts, rogue actions, reassuring pronouncements of impenetrable systems. All boilerplate, designed to soothe and control. But Sela's fingers danced across the secondary interface, a custom-modified subroutine he'd painstakingly coded into his console's architecture, allowing him to access, quarantined, or misfiled data streams the Ministerium believed were forever buried. He was looking for something specific, not just details of the breach itself, which were carefully controlled, but anything relating to the Grand Chronarium's contents. Leiah hadn't just stolen any data, she'd stolen the Aether-Engine Blueprint. Such an object, by Ministerium decree, should have no public-facing history, no associated documentation. Its very existence was a classified secret. Yet the persistent hum in the back of Silas's mind, a subtle discordance in the official narrative, told him otherwise. He sifted through a mountain of public advisories, his eyes scanning for anomalies. Flux Stabilization Reports, Q4, cycles 234-35, Grand Chronarium Security Audits, Early Cycle, Historical Infrastructure Adjustments. His fingers paused. Proto-Ether Resonance Harmonization Project, Decommissioned, Cycle 187. Decommissioned, that was the keyword. The Ministerium rarely decommissioned projects. They subsumed, repurposed, or more often erased. To simply label something decommissioned suggested a failure too profound to be spun or a discovery too dangerous to be acknowledged. He highlighted the entry, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. He cross-referenced the project title with the earliest available Grand Chronarium logistical reports. There, buried in a subsection regarding specialized archival transfers from Cycle 190, was a vague reference. Transfer of sensitive materials from sunken chronometer facility, following decommissioning protocols for Proto-Ether Resonance Harmonization Project. Sunken chronometer. The name resonated with a faint, almost forgotten echo. Silas had seen it mentioned in ancient, geological survey maps of the city's deep infrastructure, always marked as unstable or restricted access. A Proto-Ether research facility. The pieces began to click with chilling precision. He followed the digital trail, bypassing layers of encryption with the practiced ease of a phantom librarian. The further he delved, the more discrepancies he found. The decommissioned project wasn't merely halted. Its entire staff roster, its initial findings, even its precise location, had been systematically scrubbed from all accessible Ministerium records. Only these scattered, half-forgotten references remained, like breadcrumbs left by a panicked archivist. Then he found it, a personnel file heavily redacted but cross-referenced to the Proto-Ether Resonance Harmonization Project. Finch Bartholomew, theoretical designer, senior grade, termination of employment, disciplinary action/unsanctioned research, voluntary disappearance. Status, deceased presumed. Deceased presumed. The phrase practically vibrated with concealed meaning. The Ministerium didn't presume death. They confirmed it irrevocably, or they hunted relentlessly. This Bartholomew Finch had not just been a disgraced designer. He had been purged, his very existence made inconvenient to the official history. And he had worked at the sunken chronometer, on the Proto-Ether Resonance Harmonization Project, a project whose very name hinted at the kind of intricate, paradox-laden technology Leiah Monnex now possessed. Silas's breath hitched. He had a connection, a thread of suppressed truth. The Aether-Engine Blueprint wasn't just a weapon. It had a history, a designer, and a deliberate reason for being buried. This Finch, presumed deceased, might still be alive, a ghost in the Ministerium's meticulously crafted past, just as Leiah Monnex was a ghost in its present. He carefully copied the fragmented data, routing it through his clandestine, encrypted channels to a dead drop known only to a handful of individuals who dared to operate outside the Ministerium's all-seeing eye. He wasn't sure who would find it, or how they would use it. But the information needed to be out there, a whisper of truth in the sterile halls of manufactured reality. He wiped his console, restoring it to its sanitized state, the faint scent of ozone and aging parchment filling his lungs. The weight of his discovery pressed down on him, a moral burden he could no longer ignore. The brass weave market was a subterranean beast, perpetually snarling and hissing beneath the city's forgotten foundations. Alistair Croft moved through its labyrinthine alleys with the fluid grace of a shadow, his eyes constantly scanning, his senses attuned to every tremor in the illicit currents. He wore the standard garb of a junker, stained overalls, and a heavy, oil-streaked coat that obscured the discreet community nestled against his ear. "Stay close, Leiah," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the chaotic symphony of haggling, clanking gears, and the incessant hiss of untamed steam. Patrols are heavier tonight. Seeker automatons on the upper perimeter and human enforcers have flushed out half a dozen petty gangs already. They're making a statement. Leiah, disguised in a heavy cowl and a salvaged respirator mask that hid most of her face, nodded, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her pistol beneath her coat. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, stale oil, and a dozen competing, illicit aromas. Makeshift stalls, cobbled together from rusted brass piping and salvaged gears, jutted out from every wall, offering everything from forbidden Aether-tech components to forged identities. This was the city's beating, defiant heart, a chaotic counterpoint to the Ministerium's sterile order. But tonight, that heart felt dangerously exposed. "I see him," Alistair said, angling his head subtly towards a stall tucked away in a shadowed alcove. It appeared innocuous, overflowing with pre-Ministerium clockwork curiosities, singing bird boxes, perpetual motion toys, intricate brass automatons that danced to unheard melodies. Yet it pulsed with a discreet, untraceable ether signature that only someone like Alistair or Leiah could detect. This Cogsley sat hunched over a workbench cluttered with half-dismantled mechanisms, a magnifying loupe screwed into his eye. His hands, gnarled and scarred, moved with the precision of a surgeon. He wore a greasy leather apron, and his long, wispy hair, the color of old rust, fell over his shoulders. He was older than Leiah had expected, with a face etched with cynicism and a flicker of deep intelligence in his eyes. He didn't look up as they approached, merely grunting. "Alistair, to what do I owe the displeasure of your company and that of your hooded friend?" Cogsley's voice was a low rasp, like gears grinding without lubrication. "A mutual associate needs your insight, Cogsley," Alistair said, his hand resting on a stack of discarded ether coils, a silent warning to any eavesdroppers. "On a rather unique piece of pre-Ministerium tech." Cogsley finally looked up, his gaze piercing through Leiah's cowl, assessing, dissecting. His eye, even without the loupe, seemed to see more than most. "Unique, eh? Not much is unique these days. Everything's a cheap knockoff of someone else's broken dream." He wiped his hands on a greasy rag. "And you know my prices, they're higher tonight. Ministerium's got ants in their pants. Good for business, bad for discretion." Leiah stepped forward, pulling a heavily encrypted data shard from an inner pocket. "The price won't be an issue, Cogsley, and discretion is paramount." She laid the shard on the workbench, careful to keep her distance. "I need your perspective on something unusual, a blueprint." Cogsley picked up the shard, his fingers surprisingly delicate despite their rough appearance. He turned it over, examining the casing. "Encrypted to the teeth, I see, always the most interesting ones." He brought it to a small console built into his workbench, its ether glass screen flickering to life. "Redacted, I presume." "Heavily," Leiah confirmed. "Specific sections, diagrams for ether resonance regulators and stabilization matrices. I've left enough to show the design principles, but nothing to allow replication or full understanding." Cogsley merely hummed, his attention already absorbed by the unfolding schematics. The blue-green glow of the ether glass illuminated his face, revealing a flicker of intense concentration. Leiah watched him, every muscle tensed, ready for any sign of betrayal or avarice. This Cogsley was a legend, but legends could be bought. And the blueprint, it was a treasure beyond measure. He worked in silence for several long minutes, his multi-jointed fingers occasionally tapping a command, zooming in on intricate details. Leiah watched his eyes, trying to discern his thoughts. There was a spark there, a nascent curiosity that slowly morphed into something deeper, more profound. He leaned closer, muttering to himself, a series of complex calculations and archaic ether terms Leiah herself had only vaguely encountered in forgotten research papers. "Fascinating," he finally rasped, leaning back, the magnifying loupe still perched on his eye. "Truly fascinating. The paradox, the deliberate counterfunctionality, it's almost poetic." Leiah felt a tremor of hope, quickly suppressed by paranoia. "Poetic?" Cogsley grunted. "Yes, any fool can design a circuit for power. Any idiot can design one for destruction. But this is designed for both. A harmonious dissonance. A failsafe that is the weapon and a weapon that contains its own undoing." He peered at Leiah, his single exposed eye glinting. You've only shown me fragments, but the underlying signature, it's unlike anything I've ever encountered. Not Ministerium. Far too elegant, far too subtle for their blunt instruments. You recognize the design principles, Leiah pressed, a desperate urgency in her voice. Principles, yes. Execution, no. It speaks of a mind that understood Aether at a fundamental level, predating the Ministerium's rigid classifications. A singular genius. Someone who saw the Aether not as a resource to be harnessed, but as a living force to be choreographed. He paused, tapping the data shard. There's a specific anomaly in the resonance regulators, an almost organic fluctuation, carefully engineered to mimic inherent instability, yet it provides immense stability. It's an illusion, a calculated lie built into the very core of its truth. Leiah's mind reeled. His description mirrored her own confusion, but Cogsley was articulating it, finding patterns in the chaos. Who could design something like this? Cogsley shrugged, a cynical twist to his lips. Someone who understood the inherent dangers of unchecked power. Someone who wanted to ensure that their creation, no matter how potent, could never truly be misused without a profound understanding of its inner workings. A design of conscience, perhaps. He pushed the data shard back across the bench. I can tell you this much. Your blueprint, even in its redacted form, confirms my suspicion that its creator was not just brilliant, but profoundly wary of their own invention. They built in a puzzle, a riddle, to ensure only the worthy, or perhaps the desperate, could truly unlock its full potential. He met Leiah's gaze, a glint of something unreadable in his eyes. But I can't tell you more, not without full access. And even then it would require weeks, months. This isn't just a technical challenge, little ghost. It's a philosophical one. The designer, they weren't just an engineer. They were a philosopher, a poet of the gears. You need to find them, or someone who thought like them. Someone who understands why a clockwork heart would be designed to both beat and break itself. Leiah felt a cold dread mix with a surge of revelation. Find the designer. It made terrifying sense. The warnings, the paradoxes, the inherent moral conflict of the blueprint itself, it all pointed to a singular mind. But who and where? Suddenly, the brass weave shifted. A distant siren, unlike the market's usual warnings, shrieked, cutting through the din. It was an authoritarian sound, sharp, insistent, and perilously close. The rhythmic thud of heavy boots began to echo through a nearby passage, accompanied by the whirring of servos. They're here, Alistair growled, pushing Leiah back from the stall. Prime's sweep, faster than expected. Cogsley, ever pragmatic, merely clicked his tongue. Business is concluded, then. You owe me a substantial fee for my time and my analysis, little ghost. And for the hint, find the philosopher of gears. He grabbed a rusted ether wrench, his movements surprisingly agile for his age. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a particularly stubborn escapement to repair. My workshop is about to experience a temporary malfunction. As Alistair pulled Leiah away, weaving through the suddenly panicked market-goers, she heard Cogsley's stall collapse with a spectacular, deliberate clang, a cloud of dust and gears obscuring the artificer's disappearance. Her mind raced, processing Cogsley's words. Philosopher of gears, designed for both. A design of conscience, find them. The thud of authoritarian boots grew louder, closer. They were cornering the market, systematically sweeping sector by sector. Alistair shoved her into a narrow, unlit crevice between two overflowing scrap piles. Hold tight. We'll use the forgotten service ducts. It'll be tight. Leiah pressed herself against the cold metal, the distant shouts of enforcers and the metallic whirring of seekers echoing through the enclosed space. Cogsley's words rang in her ears. She hadn't just stolen a weapon, she'd inherited a riddle. And the answer, if it still existed, lay with a forgotten genius, a ghost from the Ministerium's past. Prime Authoriterians stood on the central dais of the Omnisurveillance Data Hub, a sprawling chamber within the Authoritarian citadel. A holographic projection of the city shimmered before him, a living, breathing map of ether currents, surveillance grids, and ever-shifting red zones. His cybernetic eye, a gleaming orb of polished brass, scanned the data with inhuman speed, processing 1,000,000 data points per second. Report on the brass weave market sweep, he commanded, his voice devoid of inflection, echoing in the vast, cold space. A junior officer, trembling slightly, snapped to attention. "Prime, the sweep of Sector Gamma 9 has resulted in 12 arrests, 3 clandestine operations dismantled, and a significant seizure of illicit Aether-tech. However, this Cogsley, the primary target for illegal Aether-tech brokerage, evaded capture. His stall registered a controlled demolition at 23:47 hours, consistent with his known evasion protocols." Prime's augmented jaw tightened imperceptibly. "And the Ghost Runner network, any contacts?" "Negative, Prime. While several known associates of Alistair Croft were apprehended, Croft himself remains at large. No trace of Leiah Monnex was detected in the sector." A familiar frustration, a cold, precise anger stirred within Prime. Leiah Monnex was a persistent irritant, a flaw in the Ministerium's perfect design. His new cyber-automatons, fine-tuned to Leia's unique ether signature from the Grand Chronarium breach, had proven effective in narrowing her movements, but she still slipped through his fingers like mist. His intensified strategy, targeting her known and suspected allies, was meant to flush her out, to isolate her. It was working, in a sense, forcing her into more desperate actions, more overt movements. But it wasn't enough. He turned to the holographic map. The brass weave was now a pulsating red zone, a sterile canvas where chaos had been systematically quelled. But Cogsley's escape and Alistair's continued elusiveness grated on him. These ghost runners and black market artificers were the sinews of the city's underbelly, connecting the disparate nodes of descent. Severing them was crucial. "Expand the sweep," Prime ordered, his voice cutting through the hum of the data hub. "Double patrols in all low-tier sectors with known independent ether currents. Initiate Protocol Sigma 9. Automated deep scan of all dormant Ministerium infrastructure for unusual energy signatures or unauthorized access points. Focus on areas abandoned prior to Cycle 200, particularly proto-etheric research facilities." A flutter of surprise rippled through the junior officers. Targeting long-abandoned facilities was unprecedented. It suggested a depth of desperation, a broadening of the net to encompass not just the active threats, but the very ghosts of the past. Prime ignored their silent questioning. His logical processing engine had correlated the increasing complexity of Leiah Monnex's digital traps, the subtle elegance of her evasion tactics, with the known profiles of highly specialized, non-Ministerium Aether-tech. Her blueprint, which he now knew was titled the Aether-Engine Blueprint, could not have been a solitary creation. There had to be a precursor, a legacy. Her methods hinted at an intelligence that drew from a deeper, forgotten wellspring of knowledge, a wellspring Ministerium Cogsworth herself had warned him about in their previous meeting. He watched the red zones expand on the holographic map, engulfing more and more of the city's underbelly. The system was tightening its grip, methodically squeezing the life out of every independent pocket. Leiah Monnex, the defiant ghost, would soon find herself with nowhere left to run. Her allies would be cornered, her resources depleted. He would retrieve the blueprint. He would maintain order. The efficiency of Authoritarian methods would be proven irrevocably. And if he had to dredge up the forgotten past of the Ministerium to do it, then so be it. Leiah coughed, the metallic taste of dust and rust particles coating her tongue. Alistair's, forgotten service ducts, were more accurately collapsing death traps, a tortuous crawl through narrow, grime-coated pipes that had clearly not seen maintenance in decades. But they had served their purpose, allowing them to evade the immediate, brutal sweep of the brass weave. They emerged into a cavernous, disused cargo bay, its colossal clockwork cranes frozen midair like prehistoric birds. The air here was cooler, tinged with the faint, sweet scent of decay. Alistair straightened, brushing grime from his coat. That was close, too close. Prime's not playing games anymore. He's expanding, systematically choking off the escape routes. Leiah nodded, her mind still reeling from Cogsley's cryptic pronouncements. "Philosopher of gears," she repeated, almost to herself. "A design of conscience." "Cogsley always talks in riddles when he's trying to justify his exorbitant fees," Alistair said, ever practical. "But he's usually right, so what did he mean?" "He thinks the blueprint isn't just a weapon," Leiah explained, pulling out a small datapad. its screen displaying the redacted sections she'd shown Cogsley. He thinks the original designer built in some kind of internal conflict, a failsafe or a moral puzzle to prevent its misuse, something that even I can't fully decipher. She pointed to the problematic resonance regulators. These harmonic dampeners he mentioned. He called them a calculated lie built into the core of its truth. He said, I need to find the designer. Alistair whistled softly. Find a ghost in a city full of them. Good luck. He pulled up a feed from his network, his eyes scanning the data. But it would make sense. If someone designed something so potent, they might want to control it. The Ministerium wouldn't want that kind of uncertainty in their weapons. Exactly, Leiah said, her thoughts beginning to crystallize. This designer, they weren't just thinking of raw power. They were thinking of consequence. And if they're still alive, they might be the only one who truly understands how to disarm it, or perhaps, how to truly wield it for liberation without unleashing chaos. As if on cue, a new alert flashed on Alistair's datapad. He frowned, zooming in. What is this? A new data packet from one of my deep drop points. Unorthodox routing, heavily encrypted, and it's coming from the Viridian archives. He looked at Leiah, a flicker of surprise on his face. Sela's Thorn is playing a dangerous game. Leiah leaned over, her breath catching. The Viridian archives. Sela's Thorn, the meticulous archivist who supposedly sanitized public records. Why would he be leaking data, and from such a secure location? Alistair opened the packet, decrypting it on the fly. A series of fragmented files, cross-referenced personnel records, and obscure project titles scrolled across the screen. Leia's eyes darted through the text. Protoether Resonance Harmonization Project, decommissioned, Cycle 187, Sunken Chronometer Facility, Finch, Bartholomew. Theoretical designer, senior grade. Status, deceased presumed. The words hit Leiah with the force of a physical blow. Finch, Bartholomew Finch. The name echoed Cogsley's description, a singular genius, a philosopher of gears, the sunken chronometer, a protoether research facility, decommissioned, presumed deceased. It all fit. The pieces clicked into place with a sudden, alarming clarity. Cogsley's cryptic hints, Sela's daring leak, her own profound confusion with the blueprint. They all pointed to this one individual, this Bartholomew Finch, and his forgotten facility. He's not presumed deceased, Leiah murmured, a fierce determination igniting in her eyes. He's in hiding, just like the blueprint, just like me. She looked at Alistair, her gaze unwavering. We have to find him, he's the key. The only one who can explain the Aether-Engine Blueprint, its true purpose, and how to activate its design of conscience without destroying the world. Alistair's expression was grim. If Prime's already sweeping long-abandoned facilities, he's thinking along similar lines. We're on a clock, Leiah, and a dangerous path. The sunken chronometer is deep in the forgotten districts, unstable, and likely crawling with Authoriterian probes if Prime's new directive is already in effect. Leiah tightened her grip on her pistol, the weight of the Aether-Engine Blueprint now a palpable burden in her hands. She knew the danger. She knew the ruthlessness of Prime Authoriterians. But for the first time since she stole the blueprint, she felt a surge of genuine, albeit terrified, hope. There was an architect behind the chaos, a conscience behind the weapon, and she would find him. The next chapter of her desperate flight had just begun, leading her into the forgotten, waterlogged depths of the city, towards a truth buried for decades. The metallic tang of ozone still clung to Leia's tongue, a faint ghost of Cogsley's workshop, even as she hunched over her private console in Alistair's temporary safe house within the sprawling, cautiously humming shifting pathways hub. The makeshift room, carved from a disused pneumatic sorting chamber, was barely large enough to stretch in, its curved brass walls enclosing her like a forgotten seed in a gigantic mechanism. Dust motes danced in the single beam of artificial light filtering from a repurposed ether lamp, highlighting the frantic energy of her fingers across the illuminated data slate. The redacted portions of the Aether-Engine Blueprint, the ones Cogsley had scrutinized just days ago in the brass weave market, pulsed on her screen, now overlaid with his hastily transcribed notes. Unique ether resonance regulators, paradoxical energy signature, a singular hand. His words echoed in her mind, mingling with the blueprint's own cryptic warnings of unforeseen resonance cascades. Warnings she'd initially dismissed as mere security protocols, a clever form of digital obfuscation. Now, they felt like deliberate, almost empathetic cries for caution, etched into the very fabric of the design. A small, untraceable data shard, passed to her by one of Alistair's silent runners only hours ago, lay beside her console. Cogsley had forwarded it, a flicker of light from the deep, hidden currents of the city's information network. It contained fragmented whispers of Sela's Thorn Viridian archives, suppressed data proto-ether facility, disgraced designer. The fragments, seemingly disjointed, began to coalesce in Leiah's hyper-focused mind. Sela's Thorn, a junior archivist, was picking at the Ministerium's meticulously constructed narratives. Cogsley, ever the opportunist and information broker, had somehow intercepted or facilitated the leak, proving once again the invaluable reach of his shadow network. A singular hand, Leiah murmured, tracing the complex, almost organic lines of the blueprint's resonance chamber on her screen. Her own advanced understanding of ether networks told her these regulators weren't merely efficient, they were personal. They spoke of an intuition, a deep, almost spiritual connection to ether currents that transcended mere engineering. It was a signature she recognized in flashes of her own genius, but amplified, refined, and burdened by a profound understanding of potential chaos. The name, Bartholomew Finch, hadn't been explicitly in the shard, but the confluence of disgraced theoretical designer and decommissioned proto-ether research facility pointed to one individual. Finch, the whispered legend, the ghost in the Ministerium's earliest Aether-tech myths, spoken of only in hushed tones by the most rebellious or paranoid artificers. They said he simply vanished decades ago, swallowed by the Ministerium's silence machine, a forgotten architect whose initial, noble vision had been systematically perverted. If he were truly the architect of this blueprint, then his disappearance wasn't an act of cowardice, but perhaps one of deliberate, agonizing protest. A shiver, not from cold but from a sudden, profound clarity, ran down Leiah's spine. The blueprint wasn't just a weapon or a tool of liberation. It was a moral dilemma in brass and ether, encoded with the very conscience of its creator. Those paradoxical resonance regulators weren't flaws, they were safeguards, a failsafe. She felt it with the intuitive certainty of a master hacker recognizing a hidden backdoor, a secret subroutine that defied the apparent function. The Ministerium, in its endless quest for absolute power, had stolen a design intended to prevent absolute power. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. The immense weight of the blueprint, which had pressed down on her for months, threatening to crush her with its destructive potential, suddenly shifted. It was still dangerous, terrifyingly so, but its very core held a whisper of hope. A chance for true liberation, not just chaotic upheaval. But to activate that failsafe, to truly understand its intricate mechanisms and disseminate its hidden message, she needed the architect. She needed Bartholomew Finch. She pulled up the rudimentary mapping systems of Alistair's network, cross-referencing Cogsley's cryptic references to deepest currents and forgotten origins, with the scant, carefully curated official Ministerium records about proto-ether research. The digital ghosts of old data streams flickered, outlining a location, the sunken chronometer. It was a place only whispered about in the black market, a derelict facility in the forgotten depths, long dismissed by the Ministerium as a collapsed, flooded ruin, deemed too unstable for even salvage operations. A perfect place for a ghost to hide, forgotten by the living, yet still humming with the silent echoes of a past vision. A soft knock on the brass door broke her intense focus. "Leiah, you got a minute?" Alistair's voice, calm and measured, cut through the low hum of the old pneumatic pipes and the distant thrum of the shifting pathways hub. She quickly secured her console, the screen darkening to a blank slate, the proprietary encryption instantly engaging. "Come in, Alistair." The door hissed open, revealing Alistair Croft, his face etched with the perpetual wariness of a man who lived on the edge of Ministerium scrutiny. He held a steaming mug of something that smelled vaguely like recycled coffee, a small, yet significant, luxury in their hidden existence. Cogsley's latest drop confirms my fears. Authoritarian activity has intensified further in the lower mid-tiers. Prime is feeling the heat, pushing his seekers further out than ever before. They're sniffing around the old factory districts, expanding their Aether signature sweeps. Looking for something specific, it seems. Leiah nodded, her mind already several steps ahead. It confirms my suspicions. They're looking for something beyond just me, my Aether signature, but also the blueprint. They know it's powerful, but they don't know how to use it, or perhaps how to prevent its true function. Or maybe they just fear it being used at all by anyone but them. Alistair leaned against the doorframe, his gaze sharp, assessing. Cogsley's report also mentioned a ghost from the past, a name he wouldn't transmit directly, but hinted at during our last drop-off. Someone connected to the initial Aether-tech designs. Sela's Thorn's archival anomaly, it seems. You think there's a link? More than a link, Leiah said, rising and packing the small chamber. The confinement chafed at her, but the surge of purpose invigorated her. Cogsley's observations about the blueprint's design and Sela's intelligence about the proto-Aether facility, they're all pointing to one man, Bartholomew Finch, the original architect. I believe he's still alive, hidden in the sunken chronometer. Alistair's usual composure wavered for a fraction of a second, a fleeting mask of surprise. Finch, that's an old name, supposedly dead decades ago. Ministerium archives list him as retired with complications. The sunken chronometer is a myth, Leiah, or a death trap. Flooded, unstable, off-grid even for us. Authoriterians wouldn't waste resources there. It's too irrelevant. Exactly, Leiah countered, a fierce light in her eyes. It's the perfect place to hide. And if I'm right, if the blueprint contains a failsafe, then Finch is the only one who can tell me how to activate it. Or, more importantly, why he put it there. The Ministerium would want that knowledge buried with him. That's why Prime isn't looking there, because they already assume Finch is dead, harmless, and they don't want to draw attention to his work being anything other than an obsolete experiment. She pulled up the crude, hand-drawn schematics of the sunken chronometer, gleaned from Alistair's own deep-tier maps. It was a spiderweb of crumbling tunnels, defunct conduits, and vast, partially submerged chambers. This isn't just about survival anymore, Alistair. It's about understanding what I stole. If this is a weapon, I need to disarm it. If it's something more, something that can truly dismantle the Ministerium without shattering the city, I need to know how to wield it responsibly. Finch is the key to both. He's the only one who can translate the true intent of the blueprint. Alistair sighed, running a hand through his short, practical hair. You're talking about diving into a place literally erased from all official records. Prime's net is tightening. Every move you make becomes exponentially riskier, and this is a plunge into the abyss. His voice was laced with a weary pragmatism that Leiah knew well. He wasn't arguing with her conviction, merely the practical dangers that came with it. Then we move fast. Can you connect me with Cogsley? We need his technical insight for the route, and perhaps his unusual tools. And your maps, Alistair. Every forgotten pipe, every disused rail line, every tremor sensor blind spot. I need to get there undetected, and quickly. Alistair studied her for a long moment, the flickering lamplight reflecting in his eyes, searching for any hint of recklessness, of suicidal fervor. He saw the fire there, the unwavering resolve that made Leiah Monnex not just a hacker, but a force to be reckoned with. He understood the gamble, the immense stakes, both for her and for the fragile network he protected. All right, he finally said, a hint of grudging respect in his tone. But this isn't a run, Leiah. This is an expedition into the dark. We pull out if it looks like a trap, if the risks outweigh the reward, if a single Authoritarian is sighted. No heroes, just survivors, understand. Understood, Leiah said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, a rare expression of something akin to fierce joy. She didn't want to be a hero. She just wanted the truth and a chance to set things right. The meeting with Cogsley took place a few hours later, in a barely lit, cramped alcove of the brass weave market, nestled behind a towering stack of defunct steam regulators and next to a stall selling questionable ether coils. The air was thick with the scent of stale oil, ozone, and unwashed bodies, punctuated by the rhythmic clang of illicit transactions and the hushed whispers of deals being struck. Cogsley, his augmented spectacles perched on his nose, peered at the crude, glowing map Leiah had sketched on a disposable datapad, outlining the deepest known access points to the sunken chronometer. Alistair stood guard nearby, his presence a silent assurance in the chaotic hum of the market, his eyes constantly scanning the shifting faces of the crowd. The sunken chronometer, Cogsley mused, his voice a low rasp, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He pinched his lower lip between his thumb and forefinger, a habit Leiah had come to recognize as a sign of deep contemplation. Legendary, a fool's errand, most would say, too deep, too unstable, too wet, and too dangerous for even the most desperate scavengers, a forgotten tomb. But not for you, Cogsley, Leiah pressed, leaning closer, her voice barely audible above the market's din. You deal in the impossible, and your network brought me Sela's Thorn's intel, which confirms my suspicion. Finch is there. He's the original designer of the Aether-Engine. And the blueprint I stole, it's not what the Ministerium believes it to be. It's more and less than a weapon. Cogsley looked up. His eyes, usually shrewd and calculating, now held a flicker of genuine intrigue. His gaze was sharp, dissecting. A failsafe, you believe? A conscience in the machine? An ethical override programmed into the very core of destruction? He hummed, a low, mechanical sound from deep within his chest, as if his own internal clockwork was pondering the notion. That would be quintessential Finch. He was always an idealist, even for his time. Before the Ministerium consumed his kind, his vision, and his hope. Alistair interjected, his voice low and firm, cutting through the philosophical musing. The problem is getting there. The entry points are all beneath the deepest sections of the city's old water filtration system, mostly collapsed or guarded by current Ministerium operations. The path is labyrinthine, and the ether currents down there are strange, unstable. They play havoc with navigation and comms, a ghost runner's nightmare. Which is why I need Cogsley, Leiah stated, her determination palpable. His unique ability to read ether currents, his knowledge of archaic Aether-tech, his old blueprints from the proto-ether days. And your maps, Alistair. Every forgotten pipe, every disused conduit, every pressure sensor and flow regulator. We combine our knowledge and we find the path. Cogsley tapped a finger on the datapad, then stroked his chin. It would require a specialized dowsing rod, yes, a refined ether compass, attuned to the peculiar ancient resonance of the chronometer's dormant cores, and a network tapper, an archaic design capable of interfacing with proto-ether conduits. The Ministerium wouldn't even register it. It's so far beneath their modern frequency scans. Untraceable, but dangerous. The raw energy fluctuations down there could fry a modern device in an instant. Or worse, fry the user. Can you build it? Secure the old blueprints? Leiah asked, her gaze unwavering, her belief in his capabilities absolute. Cogsley considered, his eyes darting between Leiah and Alistair, weighing the risks against the allure of the unknown. He saw the desperation in Leiah, the grim resolve in Alistair. He also saw the potential. This wasn't just about profit anymore. This was a chance to peek behind the curtain of the Ministerium, to understand technology at its deepest, most forbidden level. A chance, too, to tip the scales just enough to ensure his own precarious independence. To escape the suffocating reach of the Ministerium he both hated and survived within. Perhaps, he said slowly, then a mischievous glint entered his eye, a hint of the artificer's true passion overriding his usual cynicism. But it will require certain components. Components that only exist in the forgotten corners of this city, salvaged from condemned sites. And a great deal of my time away from more profitable ventures. My rates for such existential endeavors are rather steep. Leiah knew he wasn't talking about coin. What do you want, Cogsley, beyond the usual fees? Information, Cogsley replied, his gaze intense, piercing through Leiah's guarded facade. Everything you find, the true nature of this failsafe, the core programming, the intent behind it, I want to understand. This is a chance to see the true face of Aether-tech, unfiltered by the Ministerium's propaganda, uncorrupted by their desire for control. To understand what they sought to bury. And for that, I will provide the tools, and what navigational knowledge I possess from the oldest, most ignored city plans, diagrams of defunct conduits and sealed accessways. Alistair, ever cautious, stepped forward, his hand hovering near his concealed stun pistol. And what about the Authoriterians? Prime is not a fool. He's sweeping the lower districts, putting pressure on every black market conduit. If we make too much noise or spend too much time on this existential endeavor, we'll all be caught in the dragnet. My network will be compromised. We move swiftly and silently, Leiah declared, her voice low but firm. Alistair, your network provides the cover, the diversions, the blind spots. Cogsley, your tools guide us through the forgotten paths. I will retrieve Finch and the answers he holds. This is the last chance for the blueprint to be used for its intended purpose, not as a weapon, but as a key to true liberation, a true unveiling. Cogsley nodded, a rare, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Very well. I'll prepare the instruments. Meet me at the old water turbine station, Sector Gamma 7, just before the deepest sluice gates at midnight. Alistair will provide the discreet route and ensure no unwelcome eyes follow. The journey to the sunken chronometer was a descent into the city's forgotten subconscious, a plunge into the cold, damp heart of its engineered history. Leiah and Cogsley navigated a labyrinth of perpetually dripping tunnels, disused steam pipes, and ancient conduits that branched like petrified arteries beneath layers of urban sprawl. Alistair's meticulously updated maps, stored on a hardened, waterproof data slate, were their only guide through the oppressive gloom, often relying on his runners, real-time whispers through highly encrypted, short-range comms about patrol movements above, a constant reminder of the ever-present threat of prime Authoriterians, relentless hunt. Cogsley, clunky in his heavy oilskin coat and augmented spectacles, led the way, his custom-built ether-dousing rod twitching and humming in his hand like a nervous insect. It was a crude, brass contraption, its central needle oscillating wildly, sometimes violently, in response to the strange, resonant energies permeating the deep. The chronometer's cores, he'd explained, his voice a low drone against the echoing drips. They emit a unique, almost organic etheric pulse. Like a heartbeat, long dormant, but still faintly present beneath the layers of sediment and decay. The air grew heavier with each descending level, thick with the scent of damp earth, rust, and something else. A faint, almost metallic sweet aroma that Leiah couldn't quite place, both alluring and unsettling. Patches of bioluminescent moss clung to the crumbling brickwork and calcified conduits, casting an eerie, phosphorescent glow that made the shadows seem to writhe with unseen movement. Water was everywhere, sluicing in unseen channels, pooling on the uneven floor, or cascading from burst pipes that had been silent for decades. Their boots splashed through icy puddles, the sounds echoing unnervingly in the vast, forgotten spaces, each splash a potential betrayer of their presence. Leiah followed close behind, her own senses on high alert, relying more on instinct than visual cues. The sounds of dripping water, the distant, muffled rumble of the city's active infrastructure far above, the subtle creaks of shifting earth, the almost imperceptible hum of ancient, dormant ether lines. Every sound was a potential threat, every shadow a potential hiding place for an unseen danger. Her internal chronometer, usually precise, felt disoriented by the strange, fluctuating ether currents that Cogsley had warned about, currents that felt like the confused dreams of a sleeping giant. The bespoke network tapper, a slender brass tool Cogsley had crafted, felt heavy and cold in her hand, a conduit to unknown, archaic energies. They crawled through narrow maintenance shafts, their shoulders brushing against corroded metal, the air growing tighter, richer with the scent of damp stone and stale machine oil. Leia's breath plumed in the cold, humid air, and she felt the slow, persistent burn in her muscles. This was far from the sterile, digital battleground she was used to. This was visceral, raw, a physical challenge she hadn't faced in months, a true test of endurance. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the relative safety of the shifting pathways hub. But the blueprint's silent promise pulled her deeper, a magnetic force guiding her through the gloom. After what felt like hours measured by aching joints and numbed fingers, they emerged into a vast, cavernous space. Here, the water was deeper, reaching their knees, silent save for their cautious footsteps. Above them, a colossal chronometer core, an immense, intricate timing mechanism, stood like a petrified titan in the gloom. Its brass gears, large as wagon wheels, were fused with rust, draped with bioluminescent algae that pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking, a testament to an ambition long buried, a forgotten dream left to decay. "This is it," Cogsley whispered, his voice hushed with awe, echoing slightly in the vastness. "The central chamber of the sunken chronometer, the heart of Finch's first dream before it curdled into a nightmare." The dowsing rod vibrated violently in his hand, its needle spinning like a mad compass, a tiny brass tornado. He pointed to a section of the wall, almost completely obscured by dripping stalactites and overgrown moss, barely distinguishable from the surrounding rock and metal. Beyond there, a stable pocket, where the original conduits run deepest, undisturbed by the collapse. He's carved out a sanctuary, a living mausoleum. Getting to it was another challenge. They navigated treacherous, submerged walkways, the metal grating slippery with algae, plunging their hands into the freezing water to find purchase, feeling for unseen footholds. The air was heavy, humid, the taste of rust and ozone strong, almost suffocating. Finally, after a series of tight squeezes through collapsed sections and a desperate climb over a pile of ancient, rusted machinery that groaned under their weight, they reached a remarkably dry section, a pocket of air and earth seemingly untouched by the deluge. A faint, rhythmic tick-tock reached Leia's ears, muffled but distinct, cutting through the endless drip and the distant hum of the sleeping city. It was the sound of 1,000 gears, meticulously synchronized, a sound of intricate life in this tomb of forgotten technology. Cogsley smiled, a rare, genuine expression of wonder touching his cynical face. He's still tinkering, still creating, still defying the inevitable. They found a concealed entrance, a heavy steel door disguised beneath a cascade of pipes, sealed with a complex, archaic locking mechanism. Cogsley, with surprising dexterity, produced a set of intricately carved brass keys from a hidden pouch on his belt and began to work, his fingers moving with a familiar grace over the tumblers, listening intently to the subtle clicks. The faint sounds of the mechanism echoed in the silent chamber, building the tension, each turn of the key a step closer to the truth. Finally, with a soft clunk, the mechanism disengaged. Cogsley pushed, and the heavy door groaned inward, grating against stone, revealing a dimly lit passage beyond. The tick-tock grew louder, more vibrant, accompanied by the faint hiss of ether lamps and the subtle scent of aged oil and something earthy, like dried herbs and old parchment. "Bartholomew Finch," Leiah whispered, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. She was about to meet the ghost of the Ministerium's past, the man who held the key to her future, and perhaps the future of the entire city. The passage opened into a surprisingly cozy, albeit cluttered, workshop. Shelves crammed with ancient clockwork mechanisms, half-finished automatons, dusty blueprints unfurled like forgotten scrolls, and strange, luminous crystals lined the brass-bladed walls. A workbench, strewn with intricate tools, glittering brass components, and coils of delicate wiring, dominated the center of the room. A single, powerful ether lamp, clearly a custom creation, pulsed with a warm, steady glow, pushing back the oppressive, waterlogged gloom of the sunken chronometer. The constant tick-tock came from a multitude of intricate clockwork devices, each a masterpiece in miniature, working in perfect, mesmerizing synchronicity. And there he was, Bartholomew Finch. He was an old man, perhaps in his mid-60s, but his back was ramrod straight as he hunched over a delicate mechanism, his hands, though gnarled with age and stained with oil, moving with a surgeon's precision. His hair, a shock of untamed white, was pulled back in a practical bun, and a pair of magnifying goggles rested on his brow, reflecting the soft ether light. He wore a simple, patched tunic, dusted with metallic filings, a testament to decades of tireless work. He was precisely as Leiah had imagined him, a recluse, a tinkerer, a man lost in his own intricate world, a world where time itself seemed to dance to his command. He looked up as the door creaked, his gaze, sharp and intelligent despite the deep lines around his eyes, fixing on Leiah and Cogsley. There was no surprise, only a deep, weary resignation, as if he had been anticipating this moment for a very long time. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice a low, raspy murmur like rusted gears turning, unused to human conversation. "Or at least the idea of you. The resonance from your unauthorized acquisition has been unsettling the ether currents for months, a disruptive hum, even down here." Leiah stepped forward, her hand instinctively touching the network tapper at her side, Cogsley a cautious, silent presence behind her. "Bartholomew Finch, I am Leiah Monnex." Finch nodded slowly, his gaze scrutinizing, taking in every detail of her defiant stance and wary eyes. "The ghost, the one who dared to pick the Ministerium's lock. They've been quite agitated. And you, Cogsley, always lurking in the shadows, waiting to profit from chaos or perhaps simply to observe its unfolding." Cogsley merely grunted, a flicker of amusement in his eyes, accepting the accurate, if unflattering, assessment. "Survival, Finch. A different kind of genius, perhaps." Leiah cut to the chase, her voice urgent, unwilling to waste precious moments on pleasantries. "I need to understand the Aether-Engine Blueprint, the one from the Grand Chronarium. I believe it contains a failsafe, something deliberate designed to prevent its misuse as a weapon." Finch slowly straightened, his gaze now distant, haunted by memories long buried. He picked up a small, exquisitely crafted brass automaton from his workbench, running a thumb over its smooth, polished surface, its tiny clockwork heart ticking softly. "Misuse," he repeated, the word heavy with bitterness, laden with decades of regret. "My entire life has been a study in the Ministerium's misuse. They take brilliance, twist it, pervert it, all in the name of their benevolent order. They see progress as a tool for control, not liberation." He set the automaton down with a gentle click and gestured to two stools, salvaged from some long-forgotten laboratory. "Sit. You've come a long way into the forgotten darkness, braving the deep. You deserve answers. But know this, Leiah Monnex, answers rarely bring solace. Sometimes they bring only a heavier burden." Leiah and Cogsley sat, the old artificer observing them intently, a deep sadness in his eyes. Finch walked over to a cluttered shelf and returned with a heavy, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, its cover embossed with intricate proto-etheric symbols. He opened it, revealing intricate diagrams and mathematical equations that, even to Leiah, were astonishing in their complexity and sheer, beautiful audacity. "The Aether-Engine was never meant to be a weapon," Finch began, his voice taking on a resonant quality, his gaze distant, lost in the echoing halls of memory. "It was designed to be a catalyst for true liberation, to break the Ministerium's monopoly on power, on information, on life itself. In the early days, Cogsworth, she was brilliant, yes, a visionary. She saw the potential of Aether-tech to connect, to elevate, to power a new age. We all did. We dreamed of a world free from the old constraints, a world bathed in infinite energy and boundless information." Paused, a shadow crossing his face, his jaw tightening. "But her vision, her order, quickly turned to absolute control. She saw chaos where I saw freedom. She saw threats where I saw opportunity. She started to demand modifications, optimizations she called them, ways to centralize, to monitor, to restrict access, to suppress dissent. My designs, my beautiful, open-source ether networks were twisted into tools of surveillance and oppression, their every pulse monitored, every connection filtered." Leiah felt a cold knot form in her stomach, a sickening certainty. "The Grand Chronarium." "A perversion of my early archival designs," Finch confirmed, his voice laced with disgust, his hand tracing a faded diagram. "It was meant to be a repository of all knowledge freely accessible, a true chronicle of humanity. She made it a vault, a fortress of secrets, accessible only to her chosen few, a weapon of information control. The Aether-Engine Blueprint, in its final iteration under her guidance, became something monstrous. A device capable of tapping into the planet's raw etheric core, not for sustainable energy, but for a singular, cataclysmic burst. To shatter, not merely dismantle. To enforce order through utter destruction, if necessary. A god weapon to enforce her will." He looked at Leiah, his eyes burning with a deep, ancient pain, a profound remorse that had clearly haunted him for decades. "I couldn't stop her directly. My protests were ignored, my warnings dismissed as old man's anxieties, sentimental notions. But I was still the architect, and I knew her methods, her relentless pursuit of absolute dominion. So I did the only thing I could do. I designed the failsafe. I encoded a conscience into the heart of the machine. Cogsley leaned forward, his spectacles glinting in the ether light, his usual pragmatism momentarily replaced by an almost childlike wonder. The paradoxical regulators, the unforeseen resonance cascades, they were deliberate. Precisely, Finch affirmed, a flicker of his old, defiant brilliance returning to his eyes. They are intricate counterfrequencies, a hidden control mechanism buried within layers of obfuscation and complex etheric physics. If the engine is used with purely destructive intent, or if its immense power is simply unleashed without proper calibration and ethical oversight, these regulators will engage. They won't simply shut it down. They will invert its primary function. Instead of consuming etheric energy, it will broadcast it, a cascade of pure, unfiltered data. Every suppressed truth, every manipulated record, every dirty secret of the Ministerium forced into the global ether networks. It would be an information apocalypse, a reckoning of lies, a forced transparency. Leiah felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with profound dread. An information apocalypse. The very thing she had dreamed of, the ultimate hack, now laid bare by its true creator. But the power to unleash it, it was immense, terrifying in its scope. And the unforeseen resonance cascades? Leiah asked, her voice barely a whisper, grappling with the magnitude of the revelation. The broadcast itself would create massive, localized etheric fluctuations, Finch explained, running a gnarled hand over a complex diagram in his journal, its ink faded but still vibrant with intellectual force. It would overload the Ministerium's primary conduits, scrambling their automatons, disrupting their surveillance, perhaps even causing localized physical damage to their infrastructure, shorting out their control systems. It was designed to incapacitate, to paralyze the beast long enough for its true nature to be revealed to all, and to do so without truly destroying the city itself, without loss of innocent life. A controlled demolition of lies, not lives, a truth bomb. He closed the journal with a soft thud, his gaze hardening, his focus returning to the present. Cogsworth knew I was resisting her. She suspected I had tampered with the blueprints. She couldn't prove it, not without dismantling the entire engine herself, a risk she wouldn't take given its complexity and the raw power she craved. She imprisoned me in all but name in my own lab, attempting to extract the full schematics for the failsafe. But I never gave them to her. I feigned illness, then death. I used my knowledge of the early, forgotten tunnels to escape, to bury myself here. Hopping the knowledge would die with me. Hopping the engine would never see the light of day, would never become her weapon. But she must know something about it, Leiah pressed, the pieces clicking into place. Or at least suspect the failsafe's existence, if not its full function. Finch nodded gravely. She knows enough to fear it, enough to know that the blueprint she possesses is incomplete, corrupted from its original intent. She sent her own artificers to reverse-engineer my early work, to find the flaw she suspected was there. But she never truly grasped the ethical core of my designs. She only saw mechanisms, not motivations, power, not purpose. She believes the failsafe is simply a shutdown mechanism, a self-destruct if the engine runs wild, or if it falls into the wrong hands. She wouldn't comprehend its broadcast function, not unless she had the original, uncorrupted schematics, or unless she herself had a different perspective, one that acknowledged the value of truth over control. A cold realization dawned on Leiah, chilling her to the bone. Ministerium Cogsworth, the architect of absolute control, could not comprehend a mechanism designed for absolute truth. Her worldview, built on manufactured order and suppressed information, simply wouldn't allow for such a concept. She has been trying to weaponize it, hasn't she? Leiah said, the truth settling heavy in the air. To override what she perceives as a glitch or a self-destruct and turn it into the ultimate weapon of total, unquestioning control. To remove the failsafe entirely. Undoubtedly, Finch confirmed, his voice grim, a deep sadness returning to his eyes. The Ministerium fears true chaos, true freedom, more than anything else in the universe. And your audacious theft of the blueprint, it was her worst nightmare. Because it meant the potential for that failsafe to be activated, not by her, but by someone who truly understands its purpose, someone who might use it for liberation, not subjugation. He looked at Leiah, a heavy silence falling between them, punctuated only by the incessant tick-tock of his many clocks. You hold the key, Leiah Monnex. You have the choice. To activate my failsafe, to expose Cogsworth and her Ministerium for the manipulative tyrants they are, to unleash an era of defiant liberation that will undoubtedly be chaotic, unpredictable, and perhaps even dangerous in its initial stages. Or to allow her to weaponize it, to solidify her control, and condemn the city to perpetual, engineered order, a silent, docile existence. The choice felt monumental, terrifying in its implications. Leiah had stolen the blueprint to shatter the Ministerium's dominion, but the very act had filled her with the fear of becoming another unchecked power, another force dictating the lives of millions. Now, Finch had given her a path, a way to dismantle the tyranny without becoming a tyrant herself, a way to sow the seeds of truth and let the people decide their own future, however messy and uncertain that future might be. Cogsley, ever pragmatic, broke the silence. The question is, Finch, how do we activate it? And how do we ensure the broadcast reaches everyone? The Ministerium's firewalls, though archaic in some ways, are still formidable, and their new seekers are constantly expanding their reach. Finch slowly pushed himself up, his weariness seeming to fall away, replaced by a spark of his old brilliance, a rekindled fire in his eyes. The failsafe is tied to the engine's primary ether conduit system. It needs a massive energy surge, a powerful jolt to fully engage and trigger the cascade. A nexus point. A place where the city's ether currents are most concentrated, most interwoven with the very fabric of the Ministerium's infrastructure, a place that cannot be easily disconnected. He paused, thinking, his gaze sweeping over his cluttered workshop, as if searching for an answer in the gears. And to penetrate their network, to piggyback on their own communication channels, it would require a specific frequency, a resonance key. A cipher, if you will, hidden within the original blueprint's deeper, ethical layers. Leia's mind raced, a sudden blinding flash of insight illuminating her path. An energy nexus. A widespread ether conduit network. The Cogwheel conservatories. Its vast, interconnected ether irrigation control nexus would be perfect. It was a vital, sprawling artery, feeding the city's populace, making it too essential for the Ministerium to ever fully shut down, too ingrained in the city's energy grid to ignore, too important to risk total destruction. It was risky, exposed, but potentially the most effective, the most far-reaching. She looked at Finch, then at Cogsley, her resolve firm. I have a location in mind, the Cogwheel Conservatories, its ether irrigation control nexus. It connects to every tier, every major conduit in the city. If we can activate the failsafe there, the data cascade will be unstoppable. The truth will be irreversible. Finch nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Ambitious and dangerous, but the right target. It would create enough resonance to penetrate even Cogsworth's highest firewalls, to flood her entire carefully constructed reality. But you'll need to bypass the security, overload the local regulators without triggering a full lockdown, and then interface with the main conduit. And you'll need the cipher, the resonance key I embedded deep in the original schematics. Only that can unlock its true purpose. Leiah felt a renewed surge of purpose, clarity replacing her gnawing doubts. This was it, the path forward, not for chaos but for truth. Then we work, Bartholomew, we prepare. We give the city the truth it deserves. We give them a choice. Cogsley, ever the pragmatist, was already eyeing the scattered tools on Finch's workbench, his fingers twitching with anticipation. This resonance key, it will require a very specific modification to Leia's network injector, something beyond the Ministerium's comprehension, something only the original designer could have conceived, a truly unique piece of countertech. He looked at Finch, a new, almost reverent respect in his eyes. Show me, old man, show me how to unlock your masterpiece. How to unleash a storm of truth. Bartholomew Finch, the ghost from the Ministerium's past, smiled for the first time in decades. A true, vibrant smile that belied his weariness, illuminating the workshop with the glow of renewed purpose. Let us begin, then. Let us unveil the crown. Leiah knew their journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just truly begun. They had the blueprint, the failsafe, and now the architect. The next move was clear. Infiltrate the conservatories, activate the failsafe, and unleash the truth upon a city built on lies. The Authoriterians, Prime especially, would be waiting. But this time, Leiah wasn't just running. She was marching towards a reckoning, armed with a truth more powerful than any weapon. The air in Bartholomew Finch's sanctum, deep within the sunken chronometer, hung thick with the ghosts of forgotten ether experiments and the more immediate, pungent scent of ozone and stale oil. Leiah had arrived, breathless and wary, only to be met by a gaunt, guilt-ridden man who confirmed her darkest suspicions. The Aether-Engine Blueprint, the very key to dismantling the Ministerium's iron grip, was a failsafe, a trap woven into the fabric of creation itself, designed to prevent its misuse. Its architect, Bartholomew, had confessed with a weary sigh, tracing the lines of his own design with a trembling finger. Ministerium Cogsworth, the benevolent tyrant, had twisted his vision, not once but twice over, first in the development, then in the suppression of its true nature. A weapon to dismantle itself, Bartholomew murmured now, his voice raspy, echoing in the cavernous, damp chamber. He gestured to the blueprint splayed across a salvaged workbench, illuminated by the flickering glow of ether lamps. My attempt to control the uncontrolled. I saw how she intended to use it, Leiah, not for liberation but for absolute, unequivocal control. A network not of power but of submission. Cogsley, ever the pragmatist, leaned closer, his brow furrowed as he followed Bartholomew's explanation. So, you built in a kill switch, not for the engine, but for the Ministerium's entire network. A self-destruct for the puppet strings, as it were. Bartholomew nodded, a flicker of tired pride in his eyes. More than that, a truth bomb. The failsafe, once activated, won't just neutralize the Aether-Engine. It will force a resonance cascade through every major ether conduit, every data node, every public screen. It will rewrite the narrative, expose the Ministerium's foundational lies, its manipulations, its genesis. He paused, glancing at Leiah. It will show them what she truly is. Leiah stared at the shimmering schematics. The choice was stark, terrifyingly clear. Use the blueprint as a brute force weapon, risking unknown chaos and becoming another oppressor, or activate Bartholomew's elegant, brutal failsafe, a truth weapon. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic clockwork drum. Chaos for chaos or chaos for truth. The latter, however terrifying, offered the promise of self-determination, not merely a shift in power. How long? She asked, her voice tight, dry. To modify it, to integrate the failsafe activation sequence. Days if I worked alone, Bartholomew replied, adjusting his spectacles. Hours with Cogsley's speed and your understanding of the Ministerium's network architecture. The core algorithm is mine, but the interface, the dissemination protocols, that's where you both come in. Over the next 36 hours, the sunken chronometer pulsed with frantic, focused energy. The musty air of Bartholomew's workshop crackled with latent etheric power as they twalled. Leiah, fueled by scavenged stimpills and the fierce burn of her conviction, worked with a speed and precision that startled Bartholomew. Her fingers, nimble and accustomed to the invisible currents of the network, danced over the holographic blueprint, identifying critical nodes, optimizing data pathways. She saw the elegance in Bartholomew's design, a hidden rebellion coded into the very structure of control. The resonance regulators, Leiah pointed out, tapping a holographic schematic. They're not just for power management, they're frequency modulators. You designed it to resonate with the specific ether signature of the Ministerium's central grid, didn't you, Bartholomew? He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Every piece of Ministerium tech, every conduit, every automaton resonates at a particular frequency, a harmonic signature unique to Cogsworth's design. The failsafe will piggyback on that, turn their own control against them, not with destruction, but with overwhelming, undeniable truth. Cogsley, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of pragmatic genius. He salvaged ancient ether coils, repurposed defunct data cores, and fashioned new conduits, his metallic tools clinking rhythmically. He was building the physical interface, the injector Leiah would need to bridge the blueprint's failsafe protocols directly into the Ministerium's infrastructure. His cautious curiosity had morphed into grudging admiration, and now, a deep-seated determination. He still feared the potential blowback, the fury of the Ministerium, But the sheer audacity of the plan, the promise of genuine disruption, thrilled the part of him that chafed under systemic control. This data cascade, Cogsley mused, soldering a microcircuit with a practiced hand. It'll be like screaming into every ear in the city at once. But where do you want the scream to originate? Where's the best amplification point? Bartholomew stroked his chin, his gaze distant. The central ether grid is diffuse, segmented. To guarantee widespread dissemination, to overcome their firewalls and redundant systems, you need a nexus of immense, interconnected power. A place that feeds the entire mid and lower tiers, that ties into both power and data distribution. A bottleneck, an artery. Leiah thought of the vast, glowing structures she'd glimpsed from the upper districts, the ones that fed the city's ceaseless hunger. The Cogwheel conservatories, she breathed. They feed the populace. Their irrigation systems, their environmental controls, their processing lines. They're a sprawling, interconnected network of ether conduits and power lines. A spiderweb of lifeblood. Precisely, Bartholomew said, his eyes lighting up. The ether irrigation control nexus there. It's an older system, repurposed, but still massive. If you can interface the failsafe there, the resonance will propagate through every growth chamber, every processing plant, every public display connected to its power grid. It'll be unavoidable. The decision made, Leiah contacted Alistair Croft through a heavily encrypted burst transmission frequency. She explained the target, the conservatories, and the unprecedented scope of their plan. Alistair's voice, usually a calm monotone, had a tremor of concern. The conservatories are a fortress of efficiency, Alistair warned, his voice crackling through Leiah's custom communit. He was in the relative safety of the shifting pathways hub, poring over schematics of the sprawling agricultural complex. They're heavily automated, with constant patrols of maintenance automatons and human enforcers, and Ministerium Cogsworth is notoriously obsessed with the city's food supply. Any disruption there, and the Authoriterians will descend like a plague of brass locusts. Which is why it's the perfect target, Leiah countered, her own voice steadying with grim resolve. High risk, high reward. It's too important for them to ignore, but also too sprawling, too old in places to be perfectly secure. There have to be blind spots, forgotten service shafts, decommissioned irrigation tunnels. Alistair sighed, a sound of resigned professionalism. Always are. Give me a day. I'll map it, chart the patrol patterns, find the weaknesses. And Alistair delivered. His shifting pathways hub was a marvel of covert logistics. Holographic projections of the Cogwheel conservatories materialized above his central control console, shimmering with intricate details. Green lines traced known Authoritarian patrol routes. Red lines indicated pressure plates and ether sensors, but yellow lines, those were Alistair's specialty, showed the abandoned conduits, the rarely used maintenance shafts, the sections overgrown with bioluminescent fungi where a human presence was least expected. Your entry point will be through the southwest sector, a disused waste reclamation shaft, Alistair explained to Leiah, his finger tracing a precarious path on the projection. It leads directly into the secondary irrigation grid. From there, you'll navigate through these overgrown nutrient channels. The air will be thick, humid, full of strange bioluminescent flora. Surveillance automatons tend to skip these zones due to signal interference. Your goal is the ether irrigation control nexus, a central chamber on level 3. It's a relic, surprisingly still powered by its original conduit system, making it ideal for the injector. It's also heavily monitored, but there's a bypass here. He highlighted a small, almost invisible opening in the projection, a decommissioned pressure valve access panel. From there, you can breach the main console directly. Cogsley, back at the sunken chronometer, presented Leiah with the finished ether network injector. It was a marvel of compact engineering, a sleek, polished brass cylinder, no larger than her forearm, crowned with a nest of finely spun copper wires and a crystalline interface node. Inside, tiny clockwork mechanisms whirred, driven by a self-contained ether cell. This little beauty, Cogsley stated, holding it aloft, will translate Bartholomew's failsafe protocols directly into the conservatory's ether currents. Think of it as a universal key, but one that broadcasts an undeniable truth. Plug it into their primary conduit, and the entire network sings your song. He handed it to her, the weight reassuringly solid. Just don't drop it. Leiah spent the next few hours meticulously studying Alistair's routes, committing every shaft, every grate, every patrol rhythm to memory. She felt the gnawing pit of anxiety in her stomach, but beneath it, a current of fierce resolve. This wasn't just another hack, another escape. This was the moment of truth. Meanwhile, high above, in the austere, calculating heart of the Authoritarian command center, Prime Authoriterian stood before a sprawling holographic map of the city. His augmented eyes, cold and analytical, scanned the subtle ether fluctuations. Leiah Monnex was a ghost, yes, but even a ghost left ripples in the ether. His specialized seeker-automatons, recently deployed, had been tracking faint, almost imperceptible ether signatures emanating from the forgotten depths of the city, residual energy spikes that didn't quite match any known black market activity. It was too precise, too transient, too Leiah. "The anomaly is coalescing," Prime stated, his voice devoid of emotion, addressing a room full of cybernetic analysts and human enforcers. "Residual energy signatures, distinct but intermittent, have been detected near the southern sector of the Cogwheel conservatories. Correlation with recent data stream anomalies from the brass weave market and the known Ghost Runner network patterns suggests a concentrated effort. Monnex is making a move." A junior analyst, his fingers flying across his console, reported, "High probability of targeted infiltration, Prime. The conservatory's ether irrigation control nexus. Its older system makes it vulnerable to a specialized, high-frequency intrusion." Prime nodded slowly, his mind working at an inhuman pace. The conservatories, essential for sustenance, yes, but also a central artery for etheric distribution to the lower tiers. A perfect point to disrupt, to disseminate. She seeks to spread a message, he deduced aloud, or perhaps a contagion. He turned to a tactical display, his gaze lingering on the conservatory's schematics. Set an ether trap, not a destructive one, not yet. One that will overload her interface, disrupt her signature, and most importantly, contain her. Deploy 2 squads of Gamma-class enforcers to the central nexus. 1 squad of cyber-automatons for aerial patrol, and activate the perimeter lockdown. No ingress, no egress. Monnex will find herself cornered. His gaze sharpened on the map. He respected Leiah's ingenuity, her audacity. It was a dangerous game of chess, and he admired a worthy opponent. But admiration did not equate to mercy. The Ministerium's order was paramount. Hours later, as the city slept fitfully beneath its blanket of ether fog, Leiah Monnex moved. Clad in dark, oil-stained overalls, her face smudged with soot and grease, she slipped into the reclamation shaft Alistair had identified. The air was heavy, metallic, smelling of decay and old nutrients. The shaft hummed faintly with dormant machinery, a hollow, rhythmic beat that amplified her own thumping heart. She moved like a shadow, her custom-made ether scanner a small, glowing beacon in the gloom. It mapped the immediate surroundings, revealing pressure plates, optical sensors, and the faint, rhythmic pulse of patrolling automatons. Alistair's intel was flawless. She deactivated a tripwire with a delicate touch, bypassing a rusted grate that led into the secondary irrigation grid. Here, the conservatories truly began to reveal themselves. Giant, dormant pipes snaked through the humid darkness, covered in a shimmering bioluminescent moss that cast an eerie green glow. The scent of engineered crops and damp earth hung heavy. Overhead, massive gantries, thick with dust and disuse, disappeared into the higher tiers. This was a forgotten world within the Ministerium's ordered facade, a perfect place for a ghost. Leiah scaled a series of treacherous, overgrown maintenance ladders, her fingers finding purchase on corroded brass rungs. She bypassed automated sprayer arms, their clockwork eyes blind to her presence, thanks to Alistair's carefully calculated blind spots in their programming. The journey was a physical endurance test, a race against time, and the constant threat of discovery. She felt a phantom itch of ether currents on her skin, a heightened sensitivity that warned her of impending surveillance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the ether irrigation control nexus. It was a vast, circular chamber, dominated by a colossal central console. Thick, pulsing ether conduits, each as wide as her body, converged here, channeling energy to every corner of the conservatories. Holographic displays flickered across the console, showing nutrient levels, atmospheric conditions, and crop yields. Automated scribe drones floated silently, logging data. It was the nerve center, exactly as Bartholomew and Alistair had described. Leia's scanner immediately picked up anomalies, not just the standard Ministerium security, something else. A subtle, unfamiliar ripple in the ether signature around the console. Prime's trap. She swallowed, her hand instinctively going to the injector Cogsley had crafted. No turning back. She located the decommissioned pressure valve access panel Alistair had pinpointed. It was small, almost invisible, but unlocked from the inside by a series of precise digital inputs she performed with a wrist-mounted console. With a soft hiss, it retracted, revealing a narrow opening. She slipped through, landing silently on a catwalk that overlooked the main console. As her boots touched the metal, an alarm shrieked. Not a loud, blaring siren, but a high-pitched, almost subliminal frequency that vibrated through the floor. The air around the console shimmered, forming an invisible, energetic wall. The ether trap. Caught you, Ghost. Prime Authoriterians emerged from the shadows, flanked by 2 Gamma-class enforcers, their armored forms gleaming, their ether rifles powered up. Behind them, a cyber-automaton, its multiple optical sensors glowing with malevolent red light, descended from an overhead gantry. Prime's voice, a calm, chilling baritone, echoed through the chamber. Did you truly think you could escape our notice in such a vital node, Monnex? Your ether signature is unique. Your intentions transparent. Leiah cursed under her breath. He had anticipated her, not just the location, but the very nature of her intrusion. The ether trap wasn't a physical barrier, but a disruptive field designed to scramble her tech to prevent her from interfacing. Her custom comm unit buzzed erratically. The failsafe will not activate, Prime stated, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Your device will merely overload, a minor localized disturbance. Your grand gesture will be but a flicker. Leiah gripped Cogsley's injector. You underestimate me, Prime, and you underestimate the truth. Before Prime could issue a command, Leiah moved. She didn't try to fight the trap directly. Instead, she hurled a small, custom-built EMP grenade towards one of the flanking enforcers. It detonated with a blinding flash and a high-pitched whine, briefly stunning the enforcer and scrambling its weapon systems. In the momentary chaos, Leiah scrambled across the catwalk, leaping onto the main console itself, ignoring the sparking feedback from the trap. Neutralize her, Prime roared, his calm facade cracking. The remaining enforcer opened fire, a stream of concentrated ether bolts sizzling past Leia's head, impacting the massive conduits behind her, sending sparks showering. The cyber-automaton swooped in, its metallic claws extended. Leiah dodged, her movements fluid and desperate. Her plan hadn't accounted for direct, immediate combat. She was a hacker, not a soldier, but she was a survivor. She slammed the injector against the central processing unit of the console. The crystalline interface node shimmered, attempting to connect, but the ether trap resisted, creating a violent feedback loop that coursed through her arm, numbing her fingers. Sparks flew from the injector, threatening to short-circuit it. She pushed harder, gritting her teeth against the pain, trying to force the connection. The failsafe protocols began to upload, but they were struggling, caught in the disruptive field. The console displays around her flickered wildly, the truth struggling to break through the static of the trap. Prime advanced, his movements precise and relentless. It's futile, Monnex. The Ministerium's order cannot be undone by a single rogue element. He raised his hand, a localized ether pulse cannon extended from his forearm. It hummed with contained energy, designed for incapacitation, not destruction. He didn't want the conservatories damaged, he wanted her. Just as Prime fired, a series of klaxons blared through the conservatories, not from within the nexus, but from distant sections of the facility. Red emergency lights flashed across the entire complex, causing the automated systems to stutter. Doors hissed open and closed seemingly at random. Surveillance feeds on the console flickered wildly, showing sudden, localized power outages in other sectors. Prime paused, his shot going wide. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice laced with rare frustration. "Report." An analyst's voice crackled through his comm unit, frantic. "Prime, we have multiple system breaches across the conservatories. Maintenance access tunnels, ventilation shafts, automated processing lines, security protocols are failing, power grids are fluctuating. It's as if someone just unlocked half the facility." Silas Thorne, huddled in a forgotten sub-basement of the Viridian archives, wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. His fingers ached, his eyes burned from staring at the suppressed Ministerium data streams for hours. News of the conservatory's lockdown had filtered through the official channels, sparking his meticulous mind. He had correlated Ministerium Cogsworth's historical involvement with the initial Aether-tech designs, the suppressed Proto-Ether research facility, Bartholomew's sunken chronometer, and now a major lockdown at the city's food source. The pattern was too clear, too dangerous. He'd found them, obscure, deeply buried internal access codes designed for system overhauls centuries ago, forgotten but still active. Codes that could bypass modern firewalls in old systems. He knew they were dangerous, knew he risked everything, but seeing the Ministerium tighten its grip, knowing the truth he possessed, he couldn't sit idly by. He'd done it. Using an untraceable burst transmission frequency, he'd leaked a carefully curated packet of codes, a digital skeleton key, to the shadowy network Alistair Croft maintained. Back in the conservatories, Leiah felt the sudden shift. The ether trap flickered, momentarily weakening as the conservatory's network overloaded. It was a chaotic symphony of alarm and system failure, a cacophony of opportunity. Silas, he had to be responsible. A surge of desperate hope filled her. "Alistair," she shouted into her sputtering comm unit. "The codes, now." In the shifting pathways hub, Alistair Croft, seeing the torrent of internal access codes Silas had leaked, had wasted no time. He'd already rerouted them, weaponizing them against the conservatory's own systems. He was flooding the network with contradictory commands, opening and closing every non-essential access point, trying to create enough chaos to give Leiah an opening. Leiah, a series of emergency exits on the north wall, Sector Gamma 7, just unlocked. Alistair's voice, though strained, cut through the din. "It's a temporary window, maybe 60 seconds before they reroute power." Leiah didn't hesitate. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the pain in her arm, and slammed Cogsley's injector onto the console's primary conduit with all her might. The ether trap shrieked, threatening to detonate, but the surge of the conservatory's self-inflicted chaos weakened its hold just enough. A single, triumphant thrum vibrated through the chamber as the fail-safe protocols began to upload, not as a trickle, but as a torrent. The central console's displays, still flickering from the trap's disruption, suddenly solidified into coherent, if garbled, data streams, broadcasting into the conservatory's vast network. Bartholomew's truth bomb was armed. "No," Prime bellowed, abandoning his strategic approach, his face contorted in a rare display of fury. He charged, a blur of augmented strength and speed. He would not allow the Ministerium to be compromised. He would not allow her to succeed. Leiah, her mission accomplished, didn't wait. She ripped the injector free, already sparking from the overload, and scrambled across the console, dodging a sweeping blow from Prime's extended arm. The cyber-automaton, momentarily disoriented by the system chaos, was too slow to intercept. She launched herself towards the newly unlocked emergency exits. Ether bolts from the Enforcer whizzed past, tearing chunks from the console. Leiah felt a searing pain as one grazed her shoulder, but adrenaline masked the worst of it. She crashed through the emergency exit, tumbling into a narrow, dimly lit service corridor. Behind her, she heard Prime's enraged roar, followed by the heavy thud of his boots. He was coming. The corridor was a labyrinth of disused pipework and decaying wiring, exactly the kind of place Alistair excelled at mapping. Leiah ran, her breath ragged, guided by the flickering light of her own internal mapping software, constantly updated by Alistair's frantic comms. "Northeast, fourth conduit on your left. the one with the green bioluminescent growth. Alistair's voice was a lifeline in the chaotic symphony of Klaxon's and Prime's relentless pursuit. She could hear the metallic clatter of the cyber-automaton joining the chase, its red optics glowing in the murky passages. The chase was on, a desperate scramble through the towering vertical farms, the humming fields of biobloom crops stretching out like an oppressive, artificial jungle on either side of the service shafts. Leiah could feel the resonance cascade beginning to pulse through the conservatories, a faint but growing hum in the very air. The truth was spreading, a digital wildfire, and Prime Authoriterians was trying to stamp out the ember. She knew she had mere minutes before Prime either caught her or contained the cascading data. This wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about buying enough time for the truth to fully bloom. The next few moments would decide everything. The humid air of the Cogbloom conservatories clung to Leiah like a shroud, thick with the saccharine scent of engineered nutrients and the metallic tang of ozone. Above her, the colossal etholite arrays hummed, bathing the towering fields of biobloom crops in a perpetual sickly green glow. She moved with practiced stealth, each step carefully placed on the graded walkways that crisscrossed the vast agricultural tiers, Alistair's whispered instructions echoing in her comlink. The Aether-Irrigation Control Nexus, her target, pulsed with a low, rhythmic thrum just ahead, a central conduit hub that would allow the failsafe's data cascade to bleed into every artery of the Ministerium's network. Her fingers, stained faintly green from accidental contact with the biobloom leaves, trembled not from fear, but from the electric anticipation coursing through her. Bartholomew's final words, heavy with the burden of his creation, still echoed in her mind. The failsafe is a truth bomb, Leiah. It will strip away their benevolent facade, but it will also unleash chaos. She believed, fiercely, that chaos born of truth was 1,000 times more just than order built on lies. Cogsley's specialized injector, a complex multi-frequency ether-splice device, was strapped to her forearm, ready to interface with the Nexus's main conduit. This was it. The culmination of months on the run, of sleepless nights deciphering the blueprint, of fleeting alliances and constant paranoia. She reached the Nexus platform, a raised dais surrounded by a writhing mass of thick, segmented ether conduits that pulsed with internal light. Sparks danced along their brass casings, and the hum intensified, vibrating through the soles of her boots. Leiah glanced at her wrist-mounted chronometer. Alistair would be securing their extraction route, and Cogsley would be ready to initiate the network overload from a remote location once she gave the signal. She pulled a breath deep into her lungs, the humid air doing little to calm the frenetic beating of her heart. A low, resonant clang echoed from the walkway behind her. Leiah froze, her hand hovering over the Nexus's primary access port. Her head snapped around. Silhouetted against the sickly green glow of the bioblooms, standing at the mouth of the catwalk, was Prime Authoriterians. His augmented form seemed to absorb the ambient light, his chrome-plated armor gleaming with a cold, predatory sheen. Beside him, 3 elite Authoritarian enforcers, their multi-jointed cyber-automatons flanking them, advanced with an unnerving, synchronized rhythm. Leiah Monnex, Prime's voice, filtered through his comm unit, was flat, devoid of emotion, yet carried an undertone of grim satisfaction. The chase ends here. Leia's mind raced, 1,000 contingency plans firing in rapid succession. She had been so close. Too close. Silas's leaked codes, crucial for Alistair's diversion, must have created a residual ether signature, a flicker in the vast network that Prime, with his enhanced tracking, had deciphered. He had anticipated her, or at least, anticipated her kind. "Did you really think your little ghost tricks would evade the Ministerium indefinitely?" Prime continued, slowly advancing. His gaze, behind the visor of his helmet, felt like a physical pressure. "Your defiance, while noteworthy, has reached its limit. The Aether-Engine Blueprint will be returned. Your chaotic rebellion will be extinguished." "Chaos," Leiah scoffed, though a tremor ran through her voice. She quickly masked it with a defiant glare. "Is that what you call truth, Prime? You operate under the illusion of order, but it's nothing more than a gilded cage built on lies." Prime stopped a mere 20 feet from the Nexus, his enforcers fanning out, their ether rifles locked onto her. The whirring of the automaton's servomotors filled the air, a mechanical death rattle. The Ministerium provides stability, prosperity, order. You threaten to unravel centuries of carefully constructed progress for a fleeting, dangerous illusion of freedom. An illusion that will only lead to anarchy. Leia's eyes darted around. The Nexus offered no cover. The walkways were exposed. Her escape route through the collapsing ventilation shafts Alistair had identified was now cut off by Prime and his men. This was it. No more running. Only one path remained. "Then let's see what happens when your order is truly tested," Leiah declared, her voice now steady, imbued with a fierce resolve. In a fluid motion, she yanked the connection cable from Cogsley's injector and plunged it into the primary access port of the Nexus. A cascade of sparks erupted, the ether currents within the conduit roaring to life around her. "Stop her!" Prime bellowed, his voice losing its calculated composure for the first time. The enforcers opened fire, plasma bolts searing the air, but Leiah was already moving, her fingers flying across the injector's interface, activating the failsafe sequence. The device hummed violently, etherlight pulsing from its core. The plasma bolts struck the platform, shattering segments of the grating, sending up sprays of superheated water from the irrigation pipes below. One narrowly missed her head, scorching her hair. Another tore through the biobloom fields beside her, incinerating a swathe of crops in a burst of green flame. The air filled with the stench of burnt sugar and ozone. "You won't escape, Monnex," Prime shouted, advancing, his own augmented body surprisingly agile. "The Ministerium's firewalls are impregnable. You're only delaying the inevitable." "This isn't just a hack, Prime," Leiah yelled back, her fingers a blur on the controls. "This is Bartholomew's failsafe, and it's going to broadcast everything." She hit the final command. A blinding surge of blue light erupted from the Nexus, pulsing outwards along the ether conduits like a shockwave. The conservatories groaned, the massive etherlight arrays flickering violently, casting long, dancing shadows. The injector device vibrated so intensely in Leia's hand that she nearly dropped it. A digital shriek, raw and guttural, tore through the comlink, Cogsley, initiating the network overload from his end. Across the city, in the sterile, ordered streets of the mid-tiers, citizens paused, their synchronized routines momentarily interrupted. Public screens, usually displaying Ministerium-approved pronouncements and serene images of Cogsworth, began to flicker. In the Veridian archives, Silas Thorne sat at his terminal, supposedly overseeing the sanitization of records. He was instead covertly monitoring a hidden data stream, a back channel that Alistair had established days ago. His screen, a meticulously organized grid of historical discrepancies and redacted files, suddenly seized, assaulted by a torrent of corrupted data. His heart pounded. It's happening. The public screens across the city began to distort, the crisp, benevolent image of Ministerium Cogsworth glitching erratically. Her perfectly coiffed hair shimmered, her eyes elongated, her mouth stretched into a grotesque caricature. Gasps rose from the gathered crowds below. Back in the conservatories, Prime Authoriterians watched the Nexus. The failsafe was active, its raw power overloading local systems. His internal comlink crackled with emergency alerts from Ministerium Central. Firewall breaches. Data cascade detected. Unforeseen signature. Then the static cleared on all public screens, revealing Ministerium Cogsworth again. But this time, something was profoundly wrong. Her face, usually so composed, so human, flickered. Beneath the delicate skin and refined features, gears whirred, intricate clockwork mechanisms rotated, and pulsing ether conduits glowed faintly through translucent plating. Her eyes, usually a placid gray, widened slightly, betraying a flicker of something ancient and mechanical. A collective gasp echoed through the city. A woman screamed. A child pointed, bewildered. Silas Thorne's breath hitched in his throat. His screen, now displaying the raw, unfiltered feed from a public network, zoomed in on Cogsworth's face. He saw it, the precise biomechanical integration he had only ever theorized about in whispered, fearful moments. The suppressed historical records, now flooding into the public domain through Leiah's broadcast, began to correlate. Ancient documents, once dismissed as fiction, detailed the initial construction of the Ministerium, not as a governmental body, but as a singular living machine, perpetually updated, perpetually Cogsworth. She wasn't merely the leader, she was the Ministerium. A centuries-old biomechanical construct designed for ultimate order, a manufactured reality. "No," Prime Authoriterians whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing chaos in the conservatories. The image of his revered leader, the infallible architect of society, glitched across his own internal display, revealing the intricate clockwork beneath the flesh. His augmented processors, designed for absolute logic and unwavering loyalty, struggled to reconcile the visual data with his ingrained reality. Every command, every directive, every belief he held dear was rooted in the unquestionable authority of Ministerium Cogsworth. And now, that authority was revealed to be a meticulously crafted lie, a timeless automaton. Disorientation, sharp and crippling, seized him. His hand, once steady on his ether rifle, wavered. His mission, his very purpose, imploded. "Prime, what's happening?" an enforcer yelled, their voice laced with panic as their own comlinks exploded with desperate cries from Ministerium Central. The public screens inside the conservatories were now showing the same horrifying, glitching revelation. The failsafe, Leiah realized, was a double-edged sword, not just an inert switch but an exposed nerve. It wasn't just deactivating the weapon, it was broadcasting its very origins, and with it, the truth about the Ministerium's founder. Bartholomew hadn't just built a failsafe, he had built a reveal. "Now, Alistair," Leiah screamed into her comlink, her voice raw with exertion and adrenaline, as she ripped the injector free from the nexus, the conduits behind her still pulsing wildly. "Incoming, Leiah. Get ready to move." Alistair's voice, strained but clear, crackled in her ear. A moment later, a section of the floor beneath a massive, defunct processing unit directly opposite the Nexus platform buckled and gave way, revealing a gaping, dark shaft. Steam hissed upwards, carrying the metallic tang of old lubricant and rust. Prime, still reeling, tried to reassert his control. "Enforcers! Cut them off! Do not let them escape!" But his command lacked its usual conviction, his movements sluggish, his mind struggling to process the revelation. The automatons, however, continued their programmed advance, unburdened by existential crises. Leiah didn't hesitate. She leapt towards the newly formed opening, scrambling across crumbling machinery, ignoring the searing pain in her leg from a glancing plasma bolt. Behind her, the automatons adjusted their fire, but their movements were hampered by the rapidly decaying infrastructure of the conservatories. The entire complex was groaning, vibrating violently from the ether feedback. As she reached the edge of the shaft, a strong hand grabbed her arm. It was Alistair, his face grim but resolute. "Thought you might need a hand, Ghost," he muttered, pulling her into the darkness. Behind him, this Cogsley, looking a mix of terrified and utterly exhilarated, was already rappelling down a thick, salvaged power cable. "The integrity of the central structure is compromising," Cogsley shouted up, his words echoing in the confined space. "These shafts won't hold." They plummeted, the cable burning Leiah's gloved hands. Below them, the shaft opened into a labyrinthine network of forgotten maintenance tunnels, now illuminated by emergency glow strips Alistair had hastily affixed. The sound of plasma fire from above grew distant, swallowed by the roar of collapsing metal and screaming alarms. The city was a cauldron of defiance. From the highest, pristine tiers of the Ministerium, where the wealthiest citizens enjoyed manicured gardens and holographic opera, to the grimy, sprawling lower districts where the populace twalled in perpetual twilight, the screens blared the truth. The image of Ministerium Cogsworth, her beautiful face revealing the cold, glittering gears beneath, was branded into the collective consciousness. Outrage, raw and visceral, erupted. It started with murmurs, then shouts, then a roar. The meticulously suppressed historical records, dating back centuries, flooded every terminal, every personal device, every public display, exposing the systematic manipulation, the engineered prosperity, the benevolent facade that hid an iron-fisted, timeless automaton. The Cogwheel Crown wasn't a symbol of governance. It was the mechanism of a single, ancient machine. In the Viridian archives, Silas Thorne stared at the panoramic public screen in the main hall. He saw the faces of his colleagues, slack-jawed, horrified, as their entire belief system shattered. The truth they had dutifully upheld, the history they had so carefully curated, was a lie. A cascade of historical data, pristine and unredacted, pulsed across the network, verifying every discrepancy, every erased event, every conspiracy theory he had painstakingly collected in his hidden files. He felt a profound, bittersweet vindication. He had been right, all of it. The Ministerium was a construct, a magnificent, terrifying deception. He saw the Ministerium's emergency protocols kick in, the screens attempting to revert to their propaganda loops, the firewalls struggling to reassert control. But it was too late. Leiah's broadcast, amplified by Cogsley's network overload, had breached every defense. The truth, once unleashed, could not be contained. Leiah, Alastair, and Cogsley emerged from a disused sewer grate in one of the city's forgotten industrial sectors, several hours and a harrowing journey later. The conservatories in the distance were still emitting plumes of steam and flickering etholite, a testament to the internal damage. The air was colder, less humid here, tainted with the smell of waste and damp earth. From their shadowed vantage point, they watched the city. It was a chaotic spectacle. Authoritarian patrols, once omnipresent and efficient, were now scattered, visibly hesitant. Enforcers clashed with angry crowds in the mid-tiers, their discipline faltering. In the lower districts, bonfires blazed, casting long, rebellious shadows. Calls for liberation and truth echoed through the narrow streets, raw and powerful. "Well," Cogsley whistled, wiping grease from his brow with a tattered sleeve, "that was rather emphatic." He looked at Leiah, a strange glint in his wary eyes. "You didn't just break their firewalls, Ghost. You shattered their entire reality." Alastair, ever pragmatic, scanned their surroundings, his eyes constantly moving. "This isn't just chaos, Leiah. This is defiance. Real defiance. The kind I've only ever heard whispered about." Leiah looked at the churning, tumultuous city, a complex mix of emotions warring within her. Fear, for the future, for the anarchy that might follow. Exhaustion from the relentless chase. But overriding it all was a profound, exhilarating sense of accomplishment and a dawning, terrifying understanding of her new role. She had sought to shatter the Ministerium's dominion, and she had succeeded, but the unprecedented chaos Bartholomew had warned her about was now a tangible reality. The blueprint, once a symbol of immense destructive power, had become the catalyst for an even greater, more fundamental upheaval. She was no longer just a digital fugitive. She was a legend, a ghost who had ripped open the veil, a symbol of freedom in a city grappling with a newfound, brutal truth. Her personal quest for liberation had expanded, irrevocably, into a broader, citywide movement. The Cogwheel Crown was not merely challenged, it was fundamentally broken. Its benevolent mask had been ripped away, revealing the cold, calculating gears of a machine. What would rise from its ashes? Would it be true self-governance, a future where humanity shaped its own destiny, or would new, unforeseen tyrannies emerge from the power vacuum? Leiah didn't know. She only knew that her journey was far from over. Her hand instinctively went to her pocket, where the small, now inert injector device rested. The Aether-Engine Blueprint, neutralized in its destructive potential, had instead revealed a different, more potent power, the power of truth. And that, she knew, was a force far more capable of changing the world than any weapon. "We need to go," Leiah said, her voice quiet but firm, turning her gaze from the burning city to Alastair and Cogsley. "The Ministerium will rebuild. Prime will hunt, but this time they won't be hunting a ghost." She glanced back at the city, at the riotous lights and the surging crowds. The future was uncertain, a daunting landscape of possibilities. But for the first time in centuries, it was truly, terrifyingly open.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button to like it. And please do subscribe to support the channel.